about it, so are we.
In Focus with Mike Kallmeyer, Sunday mornings at 10:30 on Spectrum Sports.
This is it. Your big break. Your one shot. Your only chance. There are two outcomes. Make history or be history.
The home of high school sports. Spectrum Sports. Exclusively on Spectrum. The television home of your favorite teams, rising stars, and all things sports. What you live for lives here. This is Spectrum Sports.
But Mike DeWine wants to double down on his failure. He thinks we're making all this progress. The numbers don't lie, Mike. The problem is worse than ever. The death toll will be even higher this year than it has been before.
You know, Richard, you're all talk and you do nothing. You've been a failure at every job you have ever had.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us for Decision 2018, Spectrum News and Cleveland.com's coverage of Ohio's third and final gubernatorial debate. I'm Sophia Constantine, and our Curtis Jackson joins us live from Cleveland with coverage on tonight's event.
Sophia, hello to you from Cleveland. We are right outside of the ballroom where tonight's debate will take place. And both candidates recently finishing their walkthroughs and giving them a chance to check out their environment, check out the camera shots, probably a little debate or two over temperature before they get ready for this evening's showdown. This has been a situation where the candidates have been not only known for what they are saying, but quite frankly, what they're not saying. They're not engaged in this entirely very culture war-like debate that's happening nationwide. In fact, a national press organization, a couple of their reporters actually referred to the two of them meeting and clashing as the thriller in vanilla. We will see if that changes this evening. This is their opportunity to make the final pitch to the Ohio voters before they get back out on the trail and try to bring that election home. And it should be a very interesting debate since we are in the heart of the medical community here in Ohio. You can bet that health care will be an issue this evening. Sophia?
All right, thank you very much. Curtis, we'll check back in with you shortly. A brief overview of the two candidates' backgrounds. Richard CORDRAY served as Ohio's Attorney General from 2009 to 2011. He lost the office to Mike DeWine in a wave election that saw Republicans take nearly all statewide positions. CORDRAY went on to serve in the Obama administration as the director of the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau. The job put him in the crosshairs of Republicans who bitterly opposed the creation of the agency and fought hard to block CORDRAY's confirmation to the position. His actions at the Bureau are just a few of the many issues that have led CORDRAY and DeWine to throw jabs at each other during this contentious campaign. Before the candidates go head-to-head tonight on the big stage, there is a lot going on behind the scenes. For a look at the preparations, Curtis Jackson joins us live again from Cleveland.
Political reporter for cleveland.com has been following this campaign since the primaries, and as we near the final stage, both of these candidates sort of known for their wonkishness, their book learnedness in terms of the issues. And these clashes, although they have been frequent and at times very eventful, tend to focus just on policy. So they have a firm grasp of their base. It is reaching out to those undecideds that's going to be key.
Yeah, absolutely. You've really got two kind of nerds up there on stage. I think that's probably the best way to describe it, and I don't think that they would argue with that either. You haven't really seen the kind of underhanded attacks that you've seen in a lot of other races. The outside groups have kind of, waded into that territory just a little bit, but really not. I mean, these guys have really long records going pretty far back. I mean, Mike DeWine's been in office for about 42 years now. Richard CORDRAY's somewhere in politics for around 30 years or anything like that. So they've got plenty of record to run on and not a lot of personal baggage that they really have to worry about. So they've really been focusing on kind of the policies that they think are going to drive out and really just kind of get that middle group of voters to come to them. You see CORDRAY really hammering healthcare quite a bit. He's also been messaging a lot about his kind of consumer bona fides, working at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, taking on the big banks. That's pretty, popular. Nobody really likes the big banks, right? With Mike DeWine, you've seen him actually recently has gone kind of in a little bit of a healthcare route. Before that, he was focused really on crime. Who's not worried about how safe their family is? So those are kind of the avenues that both of them are taking. And like I've said many times before, it's going to be about that 2 to 3% right in the middle. It's not necessarily a base election. And
this is a dead heat, according to most polling right now, with both of these candidates solidly in control of their bases. And in terms of getting out and reaching out to those undecideds, how important will endorsements be in this particular situation? Both have received key endorsements, CORDRAY having the endorsement of Obama and several other key Democrats across the country, and DeWine having the endorsements of President Trump and also current Governor John Kasich. Will they be factors as they attempt to reach out to that very important middle?
Well, it's kind of cliche, but it's sort of a wait-and-see environment for that. You've got, Trump's popularity and job approval is underwater statewide. That's after he won the state by 8 points in 2016. He's sitting about 6 points underwater, depending on what the poll is you look at. John Kasich is actually doing pretty well for a second-term governor, so that throws another wrinkle into it. If you have a popular second-term governor, it's kind of hard to get the party that is in power out. If things are going well, why change anything, right? But then, yes, you do also have, Barack Obama, who came in here, who, left office with something like a 60% approval rating and was especially popular up here in Northeast Ohio, where a large plurality of the voter base is. How much that is going to affect, I'm not totally certain. I guess maybe if you were, I don't think it's going to switch any voters necessarily, so it's hard to say who bends which way depending on who's supporting who. Some of those local endorsements might matter some if you got a local lawmaker who you really like, but then again, not many people know who their local lawmaker is, so those don't have quite the reach. So I think it's really going to be more about messaging than it is going to be about endorsements or anything like that.
Okay. So thank you very much. We'll be hearing from you a little bit later on after the debate. So as you can see, a lot to consider here in terms of analysis and also presentation as both of these guys get ready to make their final pitch to the voters in Ohio. A couple of key things tonight to consider. The audience is going to consist of about 150 people. 35 of those will be students here at Cleveland State University, where the debate is taking place, and the rest will be supporters of both candidates, sort of a split between the two. So they will have a home crowd, so to speak, as they get ready to take on each other and make their case before heading on back out there to the trail to finish up what will be a key election, not just in terms of the state of Ohio, but also nationally. So a lot to consider, a lot to look forward to here tonight. Sophia?
All right, Curtis, thank you so much for that live report. Coming up after the break, our Decision 2018 special coverage continues. Our State House reporter Molly Martinez will tell us where each candidate stands on issues affecting Ohioans. Stay with us.
Sunday mornings, take an in-depth look at your community. In Focus with Mike Kallmeyer, a half-hour show dedicated to the important issues.
We're going to instantly see the results.
Driven to bring decision makers together.
I can both probably relate to that.
And committed to elevating discussion and debate. Your community, your state, your show.
If people are talking about it, so are we.
In Focus with Mike Kallmeyer, Sunday mornings at 10:30 on Spectrum Sports.
There are two kind of coaches, those that have been fired and those that are going to get fired.
Here I am, I'm the big man on campus, in comes this new coach. And the first day of practice, he kicks me out.
Can you even describe what it's like to go 240 miles an hour?
Every day, there's something that happens that'll make me think about Woody Hayes.
Friday nights are for high school football. And no one covers your teams like Spectrum Sports. With live look-ins at the biggest games across the state, to top analysis with the pros. From kickoff to the final whistle, this is your Friday Night Huddle. High School Blitz, live Friday nights starting at 7 on Spectrum Sports, exclusively on Spectrum.
This is it. Your big break. Your one shot. Your only chance. There are two outcomes. Make history or be history.
The home of high school sports, Spectrum Sports, exclusively on Spectrum.
But you have been in charge of this opioid crisis for the last 8 years. And the fact that we would listen to you now on drug policy would be like asking for navigation advice from the captain of the Titanic.
The easiest way to understand the difference between Richard Cordray and Mike DeWine is our view of the opioid problem. He is advocating, I want you to listen to this, he is advocating from the state of Ohio something that is totally outrageous, and that is that someone could have enough fentanyl to kill 10,000 people, and yet under his proposed constitutional amendment that he has embraced and is pushing, that person would receive no jail time.
Welcome back to Decision 2018, Spectrum News and Cleveland.com's special coverage of tonight's debate. This will be one of the last chances for candidates Richard Cordray and Attorney General Mike DeWine to express their views and win some undecided voters. Cordray and DeWine present a contrast in styles. Cordray is labeled by some as boring and lacking the kind of charisma that allows a candidate to really light up a crowd. But Cordray has been fiery in the first two debates.
The interesting thing, of course, here, Sophia, is that perhaps both sides will admit that their candidates don't necessarily carry a lot of excitement. However, both have the advantage of being very familiar to voters here. Let's not forget that these two have met before back in 2010 in the race for Attorney General, DeWine winning that race, Cordray going on to a career in Washington with the Obama administration. So both of these men have a lot at stake, perhaps even their careers. This might be their last hurrah, so to speak. So what are they going to do tonight? Well, I started out by describing this, as the New York Times did, as the thriller in vanilla. The fact that neither of these men seem to be very interested in engaging in this sort of culture war that seems to be permeating throughout the rest of the country, and especially in key states like Florida and Texas. Neither one of these gentlemen want to get involved with that. So what will be their strategy for this final debate? And Seth Richardson tells me it can best be summed up as don't screw up. Neither of these gentlemen wants to alienate their base. They both have a very solid grasp of it, according to polls, with a dead heat between them. And now the goal is to try to reach out to those undecideds. And you don't want to do anything that is going to be perhaps too partisan or too far to the right or too far to the left. Look for both gentlemen to do that this evening. So the word for tonight will perhaps be, as you started out, boring, but nevertheless interesting, and certainly will have an impact. Sophia?
Yeah, I have a feeling things will heat up. Ohio's major party governor candidates both say that they would veto right-to-work legislation and foster a civil bipartisan spirit in Ohio government, and that's about where their agreements end. Republican Attorney General Mike DeWine and Democrat Richard Cordray appeared in a policy-heavy second debate last Monday. The two sparred over guns, opioids, and health care, among other topics. And joining us now to break down the issues is Spectrum News State House reporter Molly Martinez. Hi, Molly.
Thanks, Sophia. I'm here inside Cleveland State University, where in less than an hour, these two will take the podium. As you mentioned, this is the third and final gubernatorial debate, but it's worth noting this is not the first ring or race in which these two have sparred. In 2010, Mike DeWine narrowly unseated incumbent Richard Cordray for Attorney General. And tonight, they're interlocked in another race, fighting tooth and nail for your vote to be the next governor. Now, these two don't agree on much, but there are four issues that really separate them. The first being abortion, an issue that has garnered a lot of attention in Washington this week. These two candidates fall along party lines, with Richard Cordray believing in a woman's right to choose and autonomy over her body, whereas Mike DeWine is a little bit of a different story. Here's what he had to say.
I am pro-life. I believe that government exists to protect the most vulnerable people. That includes the unborn as well as the born.
There's broader issues here of equality of men and women in our society. A woman's right to make her own personal health decisions should be protected in Ohio.
Another big issue of this election, which is especially pertinent since we are on a college campus right now, are guns. Now, a lot of the groundswell calling for gun control this cycle has come from students. Ohio, as is pretty permissive with its gun laws, but both of these candidates have very different ideas on how to tackle gun violence.
We will have a person who's available, who's a mental health specialist, to every single student in the state of Ohio and to every single teacher.
What's remarkable to me is you asked about what we can do to reduce the gun violence. And Mike DeWine, in 90 seconds, never once mentioned the word guns. We have to be more realistic and more forward-thinking about how we're going to solve this problem and reduce the violence. We have to do some common sense things and have the leadership to have universal comprehensive background checks in Ohio so guns are kept out of the hands of criminals and the mentally ill and domestic violence abusers.
Tonight, we can definitely expect to hear about arguably Ohio's most pressing issue right now, and that is the crippling opioid crisis permeating every pocket of Ohio. Now, Mike DeWine, when he took office, sort of famously sued these drug companies, saying that they misled patients into how addictive these drugs actually were. They both agree that overprescription is the root of this problem, but Mike DeWine believes the onus should befall the insurance companies.
We have to make sure we do is have the insurance companies cover other alternatives. Insurance companies many times were very eager or okay to pay for the opioids, but they would not pay for long-term work with a chiropractor or other possibilities out there.
The wrong way to do it is to allow overprescription of addictive painkillers, which is a path we went down in Ohio. We need to continue to crack down on overly prescribing those addictive painkillers.
Ohio voters have already agreed they want medical marijuana, but it has been a very slow rollout. Some say it could be relief for this opioid problem, which brings us to issue 1. Now, this would essentially divert low-level offenders, get them out of prison, use those fundings towards treatment programs. And Richard CORDRAY is all for this, but Mike DeWine is very much a law and order Republican, and he feels very differently. Take a listen.
No one's going to go into drug court. No one's going to go into treatment who's in front of a judge when there is absolutely no penalty. Absolutely no penalty. Misdemeanor with no jail time. It makes absolutely no sense.
We need to have more effort for treatment in the community and less emphasis on jailing drug users, people with a drug problem, in our prisons. It's the most expensive place we can put them. It's the least humane place we can put them. It's the least productive place we can put them.
Before, both of these candidates served back-to-back as Attorney General, and as we've seen from the first 2 debates, this race is more about what they did in that office than what they will do in the governor's office, and a lot of blaming and a lot of saying that I inherited your problem, this mess that you made. We're probably going to hear about ECOT tonight, about those untested rape kits. That has really been a theme of all 3 of these debates. But, you know, there could also be surprises. We hope you stay tuned. We've got some more debate prep to do. So for now, I'm going to send it back to you in the studio in Cleveland. I'm Molly Martinez, Spectrum News.
All right, Molly, thank you so much for that live report. When we come back, we'll get you ready for tonight's showdown in Cleveland. Cleveland.com's Jeremy Pelzer will join us with more insight on the race. Stay with us.
He will score! Still on the move. Now he shoots it.
What you live for lives here. We are Spectrum Sports, exclusively on Spectrum.
You just didn't think it would happen in an Ohio State-Michigan game.
This week,
There's something. Let's party.
they were the biggest moments
That was so amazing.
and the best rivalry games
That was a sweet, sweet win.
in Scarlet and Gray history.
We had to win that.
Now, we're counting them all down.
The hype just kept building for that game. It was ridiculous.
The top 10 games against that team up north and the top 10 moments of the 2000s on Spectrum Sports, exclusively on Spectrum. Sunday mornings, take an in-depth look at your community. In Focus with Mike Kallmeyer, a half-hour show dedicated to the important issues.
We're going to instantly see the results.
Driven to bring decision makers together.
I can both probably relate to that.
And committed to elevating discussion and debate. Your community, your state, your show.
If people are talking about it, so are we.
In Focus with Mike Kallmeyer, Sunday mornings at 10:30 on Spectrum Sports. Weeknights.
Come on, you don't know.
Are for the self-proclaimed voice of truth and reason.
Hello?
What, you've never been on a talk show?
At 6, Lesson Company break down the night in sports live, taking your calls and battling the ridiculous.
What? I'm just reading you what Bob is writing.
More sports and less Levine, Monday through Thursday night at 6 on Spectrum Sports. Exclusively on Spectrum.
We're just a few minutes away from the start of tonight's debate. We want to thank cleveland.com for partnering with us to present tonight's coverage between Republican Mike DeWine and Democrat Richard Cordray. To preview what we will be expecting in just a couple of minutes is cleveland.com State House reporter Jeremy Pelzer. Jeremy, thank you so much for being here.
Hi, great to be here.
So you covered the debate a week ago in Marietta, and I'm sure you, like the rest of us over the past several weeks, have seen the very strong tone of campaign ads. Let's take a listen.
Richard Cordray failed Ohio's rape victims, and he's failing us again. Cordray's plan would allow drug dealers to remain on our streets, even when they're caught with enough fentanyl to kill 10,000 people. The same drug that is killing Ohioans every day. Cordray's plan would create a safe haven for drug dealers. Mike DeWine is fighting back, locking up drug dealers, increasing treatment, giving families hope. Mike DeWine for governor.
Opioids kill people every day in Ohio. You'd think the Attorney General would want to do something about that. But under Mike DeWine, it's just getting worse. Opioid deaths quadrupled under his watch. So maybe, instead of trying to take away protections from those with pre-existing conditions, Mike DeWine could finally try to do what he was hired to do: stop the opioid crisis. It's only a matter of life or death.
And in the second debate, the candidates were asked about the negative disclosure in the political arena and if they are elected, how they plan to mend the fence between Democrats and Republicans. Let's take a listen to what they had to say.
We can do this together, but we have to maintain the right tone in our campaigns as well. People have to tell the truth. People can't lie their way to public office in Ohio. That's not the right answer, and the voters will be the judge of that.
Throughout my career, I've pulled people together. My experience has been when people work together, they can get things done and solve problems. I'm a problem solver, but I don't solve the problems by myself.
So, Jeremy, overall, I think there has been some very strong tones between the first and second debate. In the first debate, DeWine and Cordray called each other by first name. In the second debate, they were not allowed to talk to each other directly. Of course, no rebuttals there either. So what do you expect the tone and their demeanor to be tonight?
Well, it's really funny that, just a few months ago, many people expected this to be kind of a snooze fest. Sort of two boring, wonky candidates going after each other on the issues. And as you can see, it's been really anything but.
Yeah, they are not firebranded politicians.
They, I don't think either of them is naturally suited to lobbing bombs at each other, but that's exactly what they're doing, both on the debate stage and on the airwaves.
And of course, both of these candidates have faced each other in a previous election for Attorney General. So does that make this election more personal?
Well, I think if it wasn't before, it is now, given you can kind of see, especially after the second debate, that they're not the biggest fans of each other. And I was just reading a story actually earlier about how CORDRAY has a 23-year-old stand-in to help him do practice for a debate, and even he was getting a little irked at his stand-in, at the person playing DeWine, you know, in their debate prep. So clearly there's not a lot of love lost between these two candidates.
Yeah, and so both sides have actually reached record numbers as far as raising campaign money. Do you expect that will be reflected at turnout at the polls?
Well, right now, it seems both candidates, their campaigns are doing everything they can to run negative ads against the other one. And that the goal of that is to drag down support for the other one. So it's actually funny that all this money is actually going to be spent to keep people away from the polls and not draw them toward it.
Okay, and one last quick question. They have both received major endorsements from the Trump family as well as Barack Obama. How do you think that will affect their campaigns?
Oh, well, I think, you know, Mike DeWine has not exactly been the most aligned person with Trump. He is a Republican. I mean, he hasn't said a lot against Trump, but at the same time, he's not exactly on the line of Trump that, say, Jim Renacci is running for U.S. Senate is. And on the other side, I think CORDRAY sees little downside in accepting anything he can from Barack Obama, who, of course, won the state here twice.
All right, Jeremy, thank you so much for being here. We'll talk more during our post-debate show. We really appreciate your time.
Sounds great. Thanks.
All right, and we're back with more Decision 2018 coverage after this. Stay with us.
Sunday mornings, take an in-depth look at your community. In Focus with Mike Kallmeyer, a half-hour show dedicated to the important issues.
We're going to instantly see the results.
Driven to bring decision makers together.
I can both probably relate to that.
And committed to elevating discussion and debate. Your community, your state, your show.
If people are talking about it, so are we.
In Focus with Mike Kallmeyer, Sunday mornings at 10:30 on Spectrum Sports. Saturdays after the big game. Spectrum Sports is Ohio's destination for all things college football. Join the pros from 11 Warriors as they break down all the day's action. Listen in live on Coach Urban Meyer's news conference. What you live for lives here. 11 Warriors postgame. Saturdays after the game on Spectrum Sports. It doesn't end when the whistle blows. It doesn't end when the clock runs out. When the fans go nuts. When the celebration stops. 'Cause that was all last week. And this is now. Hoban, Padua, Friday at 7 on Spectrum Sports. Exclusively on Spectrum.
This is it. Your big break. Your one shot. Your only chance. There are two outcomes. Make history or be history.
The home of high school sports. Spectrum Sports. Exclusively on Spectrum.
Welcome back. Thank you for joining us for Decision 2018, Spectrum News and Cleveland.com's coverage of Ohio's third gubernatorial debate. We're going to send it over to Curtis Jackson, who has been live in Cleveland, giving us insight on tonight's event. Curtis?
Sophia, I'm joined now by Seth Richardson with the cleveland.com political reporter. You know, we're hearing a lot about what these guys need to do and what they have done and everything else. But let's talk about what they've done together a little bit, which is they've received a lot of praise nationally for just being focused on the issues.
Yeah, it's been a pretty issues-focused campaign, probably one of the better across the country. You've seen other races get really, really ugly, get really down in the dirt, and these guys are perfectly okay with taking swipes at each other. But every time they take a swipe at each other, it's usually about past performance on the job or some kind of policy that they don't agree with. I'm not really expecting any of that to change tonight. I would expect that, yeah, you know, they're going to take some shots at each other. Of course, it's a debate. Why wouldn't you? But I don't expect it to get necessarily like nasty or just mean for the sake of being mean.
Neither of these gentlemen looks desperate at this point as they get ready to head into the final stretch of this campaign. Seth, thanks very much. Looking forward to talking to you again after this debate. We are going to have a debate that consists of about an hour. It's going to be a panel discussion that's going to involve three reporters here locally that are going to address everything from healthcare to the economy. So this should be a very interesting debate as these gentlemen make their closing arguments. Sophia.
Very much agreed. All right, thank you so much, Curtis. And now you're ready for the third and final debate between Mike DeWine and Richard Cordray, both charging to be Ohio's 70th governor. Stay tuned after the debate as we bring you live analysis.
Sunday mornings, take an in-depth look at your community. In Focus with Mike Kallmeyer, a half-hour show dedicated to the important issues.
We're going to instantly see the results.
Driven to bring decision makers together.
I can both probably relate to that.
And committed to elevating discussion and debate. Your community, your state, your show.
If people are talking about it, so are we.
In Focus with Mike Kallmeyer, Sunday mornings at 10:30 on Spectrum Sports.
Good evening from the Glasscock Family Foundation Ballroom at Cleveland State University in Cleveland. I'm Karen Kassler, Chief of the Ohio Public Radio and Television State House News Bureau. Welcome to this third and final debate between the two major party candidates for governor of Ohio. This debate is presented by the Ohio Debate Commission, a coalition of news organizations, universities, and civic groups that came together this year to create better debates for better elections. We welcome those watching and listening throughout the state on television, radio, and live stream, and of course, those here at CSU. Please join me in welcoming our panelists, Jerry Revish, anchor at WBNS 10 TV in Columbus, and Jackie Borchert, Columbus Bureau Chief for the Cincinnati Enquirer. And now I'd like to welcome our candidates, Richard Cordray and Mike DeWine.
Richard.
The format for tonight's debate was decided by the Debate Commission in conjunction with the candidates. Our debate will run for 60 minutes. Let's go through that again. The format for the debate was developed by the Debate Commission in conjunction with the candidates, and the debate will run 60 minutes. Both candidates will make opening statements up to 2 minutes long. Then the panel will begin with our questions. A coin toss determined that Mr. DeWine will make the first opening statement and take the first question. He will have 90 seconds to respond to that question, and then Mr. Cordray will answer the same question in 90 seconds. Mr. DeWine will then have 30 seconds for a rebuttal. There will be no candidate-to-candidate questions allowed. Candidates will each have 90 seconds for a closing statement. And we remind everyone in the audience to mute your cell phones and to refrain from all applause, otherwise making noise or attempting to participate in or affect the debate. No photography or recording is permitted. And with that, let's begin. Mike DeWine, you have 2 minutes for your opening statement.
Thank you very much. Well, let me thank Cleveland State for hosting us tonight on this beautiful day in Cleveland. I run for governor, and I will bring to that job the same passion I have brought to the job of Attorney General. I will fight each and every single day for the children of the state of Ohio. Our goal is that every child in the state, no matter where they're born, who their parents are, what their situation is, they ought to have a shot at the American dream, and I will do everything in my power to make sure that that happens. We will start with early childhood development. It's important for every child to reach kindergarten and reach there so that they're at the starting line. And if you look at our plan, it's on MikeDeWine.com if you want to see the whole plan. We have a very ambitious plan in regard to early childhood development, something that's never been done to this extent before in the state of Ohio. Our career centers, boy, we have some great career centers in the state of Ohio. We will take them to the next level. Our goal will be for them to be world-class and the best in the world to preparing young people, and some maybe not so young, for a great career. We also have to keep our college expenses down, the cost. We see this with college kids today who are coming out with tremendous debt, which is really impacting their lives. We're going to do everything we can to keep those costs down. Let me talk about the drug problem. We have a 12-point plan that's realistic, it's practical, doable, and it will make a huge, huge difference. We start with K through 12 education, probably the cornerstone of it. But we move from there to the drug courts. We believe there should be more drug courts. We believe also in more treatment, but we also believe it's important that after treatment, we have a plan to help people after that treatment as well. I look forward to this debate tonight and the opportunity to share more ideas. I would appreciate your vote.
Mr. CORDRAY.
This election will decide our future, so don't misunderstand. The issue between us is not personal for me. It's bigger than that. It's about all of us and how we can move forward together. The governorship is not a gold watch to be given to whoever's been around the longest. Mike DeWine has had a long run, but on key issues, he's moved Ohio backwards. On consumer protection, he has not stopped the insurance companies and the drug companies from hiking our health costs to among the highest in the nation. On law enforcement, he was in charge as Ohio became the worst state in the nation for opioid deaths, other than West Virginia. In Washington, he backed a big business agenda that ultimately broke the economy, tax cuts for the rich, letting Wall Street run wild, and trade deals that both Sherrod Brown and Donald Trump have said were the worst ever. We need new leadership to move forward. Betty Sutton and I know we can do better. Here's how. We'll take on the big drug companies and greedy middlemen to bring down healthcare costs. And we will make sure that no one loses their coverage because of a pre-existing condition. We will put in place drug policies that are tough and smart, that will crack down on drug dealers, take out fentanyl from Ohio, and provide more treatment to beat the opioid crisis. We'll create an economy that works not just for some at the top, but for all of us, with pathways to the middle class for everyone who's willing to work hard. Mike, you've had your chance for 42 years. It's time you stepped aside. And it's time for Ohioans to step into our future. This is about taking on the tough fights, who you stand up to, who you stand up for. I have always stood up to the same special interests that bankroll his campaigns, and I will always, always stand up for the people of Ohio. Thank you.
All right, let's have some questions. The first question is to you, Mr. DeWine. You have 90 seconds to respond. Mr. CORDRAY then has 90 seconds, and then you have 30 seconds for a rebuttal. You have both said that you would work to protect Ohioans with pre-existing conditions and that you support Medicaid expansion. You've also said you want changes such as work requirements. If the Affordable Care Act is repealed, what specifically could you even do as governor to protect Ohioans with pre-existing conditions? And with regard to Medicaid expansion, the Center for Community Solutions says 96% of people would be exempt from work requirements.
Karen, first of all, I have always supported coverage of people who have a pre-existing illness. How in the world could you have a family as big as we have and not understand the medical problems that people have today? Mr. CORDRAY continues to run these ads that say, I don't, and he knows better than that. He knows better than that. Rich, you know better than that. Not once, not twice, not 3 times, 7 different times I voted in favor of covering pre-existing when I was in the United States Congress. In one of those, several of those were the very bills that were underlining. So let's say that Obamacare does go away. We still have the federal law in effect as far as coverage. If we wanted to improve upon that, we can do what other states have done with a high-risk pool. We've had 35 states that did that in the past. So those are all things that certainly that we could do. As far as Medicaid expansion, we just do have a little difference of agreement. We're both for Medicaid expansion. I think there needs to be a work requirement that's not punitive in any way, but is rather to try to get people back into the game, help them, those who have a addiction problem or those who do not have the skill sets that they need. We also have a wellness program in there, which I think is going to make a huge, huge difference.
All right, Mr. Cordray, 90 seconds.
I think the issue on pre-existing conditions, I wouldn't pay attention to anything he says tonight because we have a record of 8 years of what he's done on this issue. There's only ever been one law in this country that protected people with pre-existing conditions, and it was the Affordable Care Act. Everything else he talks about was ineffective to protect people in that situation, as shown by the fact that we had to have the Affordable Care Act in 2010. And ever since, Mike DeWine has been flatly opposed to it. On his first day in office, he filed a lawsuit to set it aside in its entirety. If he'd had his way, people in Ohio, 4.8 million Ohioans with pre-existing conditions, would not have protection today. And if he'd had his way, we never would have had the Medicaid expansion in Ohio because his lawsuit would have wiped it out all across the country. Fortunately, he failed. But taking taxpayer dollars to try to take away health care from people, that was a DeWine double cross. And taking taxpayer dollars to try to wipe out Medicaid expansion, which has done so well under Governor Kasich in this state, that was another DeWine double cross. Now, why has he done this? He says, why would I do this? He's gotten $2.5 million over his career from drug companies and insurance companies. Maybe that's why. They sided with him in that lawsuit. It would have felt good to be able to drop people off the rolls just when they became expensive. We knew he was going to say this tonight, so we are releasing a letter tonight under Mike DeWine's signature, his first day in office, where he tried to set aside the Affordable Care Act and pre-existing conditions in its entirety. It will be on our website at CORDRAYforohio.com.
Mr. DeWine, you have 30 seconds for a rebuttal.
Rich, you just think that Obamacare is so wonderful and that that's the only way that anyone could have coverage of pre-existing illness. That's simply not true. Many Ohioans didn't like Obamacare in regard to taking away the rights to be able to pick your doctor, the individual mandate, many other reasons. And let me just add one thing, Richard. On this stage today, there's only one person who has sued the drug companies, sued all five major drug companies, and we have sued the middlemen as well. You did not do that when you were Attorney General. I'm the one on the stage who has done that.
All right, next question, Jerry Rebish.
Mr. Cordray, the state's Budget Stabilization Fund, better known as the Rainy Day Fund, stands at almost $3 billion tonight. It's supposed to be used as a cushion against hard economic times in Ohio. Many municipalities across the state are already experiencing hard times right now. If you're elected governor, would you use that money to help them?
First of all, what I would say is, and I've been clear on this, we do not need to raise taxes in Ohio. What I will do is raise paychecks. Now, let me talk about the state's fiscal situation. The Rainy Day Fund right now is at its statutory maximum. It's at 8.3%. It can only go to 8.5%. So we cannot add more to the Rainy Day Fund significantly. Instead, what we've been doing is we ran a surplus, significant surplus in the last fiscal year, and projected to run another fiscal surplus in the coming fiscal year. It's time for us to consider what investments we will make to strengthen Ohio's future. We will invest in early childhood programs, early childhood learning programs, strengthening the foster care system, more home visits for pregnant mothers, and all-day universal pre-K across the state. Children aged 0 through 5 need significant resources. This is actually a point of consensus between the campaigns, and I'll be able to work with the legislature to deliver this on a bipartisan basis. We also need to invest in workforce development. We need to strengthen skills training, apprenticeship programs, certification programs, our great community colleges. These are things we need to do to strengthen the workforce in Ohio. And I have said we need to support our small and medium-sized businesses across the state. And fire up our infrastructure. I have a package I'm going to put forward on that so that we finally fix the roads and bridges, and we invest in public transit and do broadband access. These are investments we can make. They'll strengthen the state. They'll create good jobs. They'll spread out opportunity.
Mr. DeWine.
What's interesting, if you total up all the money that Richard says he's going to spend, there's absolutely no way that you could do this without raising taxes. It's abundantly clear that he wants to raise taxes, if you look at some of the comments also that he has made about that. But let's talk about the Rainy Day Fund, but also let's talk about local government. I think there's no doubt that local government has really been hit in the last few years. They've been hit with the drug epidemic. And as many people in local government have told me, they do not have the money that they had from the state before. I think that it would be irresponsible for me at this point, not knowing exactly where the budget would be or what the economy is, to say exactly what you're going to do in regard to local government. But I served at local government level. I started as a county prosecuting attorney. I represented all local government. I know that in the state of Ohio, the way we like it in Ohio is local. And that means that local government delivers the services, even many of the services that come from the state of Ohio. So I'll be someone who will listen. I'll be someone, I have said that we will dramatically increase the money that we're giving to children's services. We have 2 pilot projects that we've started in the Attorney General's office to help foster care and children's services. We're going to expand those to all 88 counties when I'm governor of the state of Ohio. So real help coming in regard to our child welfare system.
Mr. Cordray, 30 seconds for a rebuttal.
That's a lot of talk about local government funds without being willing to make any commitment to restoring the local government funds. Let me be clear. I have made a commitment to restore local government funding in Ohio. It's really important. We can't be taking money out of local communities who are very cash strapped, taking it to Columbus and not bringing it back. That induces local economies to be in recession. And it also forces localities back to the ballot on sales and property taxes. We're going to keep property and sales taxes down by restoring local government funding in Ohio. That's an important thing to do, and it will definitely help all across Ohio.
Next question to Mr. DeWine comes from Jackie Borchard.
Somewhat related question comes from Ohio State University political scientist Paul Beck. It's conceivable the next governor will face an economic downturn during his term in office. If you face such a downturn with a resulting decline in state revenues, what would you do? Which state programs would you protect the most?
Well, first of all, to answer Paul's question, the rainy day fund is there for rainy days. It's there in case the economy starts to go really, really down and you have a major problem. So certainly you would look to that at that particular time. I think, though, that the goal of the governor of the state of Ohio should be to grow the economy. And that means the economy in every part of the state, not just in one particular part. John Houston and I have a plan. It is a plan in regard to opportunity zones. These are zones that the tax bill that was passed through the Congress and by the President of the signed by the President of the United States designated particular areas in the state of Ohio. Actually, Ohio designated those, but it was done through the tax bill. We will double down on that. What we will do is say that we will have that same tax opportunity for people. What that means is there's going to be more investment that's going to be made. There isn't enough government investment to invest in all our areas in the state of Ohio. We have to have private. It's going to pump money into those areas. When you put that together with what we're going to do in the area of career education, both for those who are in school now, the young people, but also mid-career as well. We have a plan, for example, to create 10,000 nano degrees, which is something that I think that people will be very excited about.
Mr. Cordray, 90 seconds.
So I think if you get around Ohio and get off the interstates and out into the small and medium-sized communities, it's raining. And people need help. That's why I've pledged to restore the local government funds. We're running budget surpluses. Those budget surpluses are made up of money that come from the communities around Ohio, and they should have that money. And in eastern Ohio, the oil and gas money, some of that should be returned to help the communities bear the burdens of that. Now, he talked about growing the economy. We should grow the economy in Ohio, and we will grow the economy in Ohio, but his plan will not do it. He has a so-called prosperity plan that only helps those who are already prosperous. It's built again on more tax cuts for the top 1% that does not trickle down to Ohio. Never has, never will. And he wants to loosen the reins so that Wall Street can continue to blow up our economy with irresponsible actions. And other than that, his program is very thin. What I have said we will do, Betty Sutton and I will do to grow the economy. I mean, how can you grow the economy without talking about small businesses and supporting them? How can you talk about growing the economy without investing in the infrastructure that we know has been deferred across the state, including access to broadband, an economic development issue in big pieces of the state, and investing in public transit so people can get from home to work? 27 counties have no public transit. Getting local government funds back into the communities. And what we need to do above all is help our businesses grow and help our workers get the investment they need to have the skills to fill those jobs.
Mr. DeWine, 30 seconds for rebuttal.
Richard, tell the people who live in the opportunity zones, tell the people who don't have jobs, tell the people who are a long way from jobs that they shouldn't have money invested in those. Tell them that. This is something that will help the poorest people in the state of Ohio. It is not just in our inner cities, but it's also in our rural areas as well. It will create that opportunity for that money to come in for investment. That is vitally important.
Here's another question that was inspired by those that were sent into the Ohio Debate Commission's website. This one from Doug Reffitt of Galloway, who noted that last year the FCC voted to repeal the net neutrality rule set in place by the Obama administration. The federal government and the entire broadband industry is now suing California over its new net neutrality law. So, Mr. CORDRAY, what would you want to see Ohio do in terms of net neutrality?
Okay, I thank Doug for his question in Galloway. He's a neighbor of mine, pretty much. What I have said about net neutrality is we should be standing for net neutrality. And everybody who uses the internet understands that they should not be discriminated against merely because some people have market power and others don't. And what I have said is I will join my friend, Montana Governor Steve Bullock, who has said that people who do business with Montana, companies that do business with Montana, IT companies and the like, need to observe the principles of net neutrality if they're going to do business with that state. And he told me when he first said that, a lot of people laughed. What do they care about doing business with Montana? But he then signed up New York and New Jersey, and people weren't laughing anymore. And I've told him I will join him in that effort. We should stand for net neutrality in this state. I will stand for it. And again, when we talk about the internet, we have to talk about broadband access. The disparities in school funding have been magnified by the fact that in parts of the state, some of the rural parts of the state, we don't have broadband access. Kids can go to school and work on the internet in school, and then to go home, they have to go to McDonald's to do their homework because they don't have access in their home. And we will make sure that the companies in Ohio do provide broadband access. We will make sure we fill in that map of the state. That's something I'm pledged to do as governor, and that will help us. It'll help farmers who use internet to deal with pricing and all the complications they deal with their crops. It will help us all over this state.
Mr. DeWine.
We have a great opportunity in this state in the next few years in regard to broadband. Where our highways go, where our roads go, where ODOT is fixing roads, we should open that up. And we should work this out with private companies, give them the opportunity to come in, lay the fiber down so that we can reach every single part of the state of Ohio. It is essential that we do this, and we need to use that as really an opportunity. If you look at the education plan that we have, one of the things that we talk about is we are going to help schools and teachers have the equipment, have the technology that they need. And whether you're in Adams County or Brown County or Wyandotte County, wherever you are, if you're a child in the state of Ohio, you should have access to that. I want to go back for a moment to something that Richard said a while ago. He was talking about fentanyl. He was talking about getting rid of fentanyl in the state of Ohio. Issue 1, which he supports, and he's Richard, you're very lonely out there. There's hardly anybody else out there besides you. It will cause more fentanyl to come into the state of Ohio. In Ohio, it will become, for under 20 grams, it will be a misdemeanor with no jail time at all. Every state around us is a felony. Where do you think the drug dealers are going to come, Richard? They're going to come right here in the state of Ohio. And anybody who lives close to the border better get out of the way because they're coming in. Nobody supports this, Richard, except you and the ACLU.
Mr. DeWine, Mr. CORDRAY has 30 seconds.
So on broadband, he didn't do anything when Donald Trump's FCC took net neutrality away. He wouldn't stand up to them. Now he promises he's going to bring it. Let's talk about fentanyl, Mike. Fentanyl has exploded on your watch. The Substance Abuse Monitoring Network report said law enforcement reports that drug cartels have flooded our state with fentanyl over the last several years. On your watch. Fentanyl deaths went from 70 a year, understand this, from 70 a year to 3,431 last year. Drug dealers have had a playground in Ohio. While you've been asleep at the switch, you've been the fentanyl failure for Ohio.
Time's up. Next question to Mr. DeWine from Jerry Revish.
Mr. DeWine, employers across the state complain they cannot find enough people to fill their available jobs. One of the biggest underutilized pools of potential hires in the state are restored citizens, ex-offenders, men and women with criminal records who've paid their debt to society and just want an opportunity to make a living. But many businesses are still reluctant to hire them. If you are elected governor, what would you do to change employer minds to get more of these people hired?
Jerry, you're already seeing some employers change their mind because of the fact they can't find people. But the governor has to lead, and I will lead in this area. The governor needs to be holding up programs that work. We have programs in the state of Ohio where businesses have started, and everyone in there is an ex-felon. Everyone is in there has been a convicted felon. We have other businesses that are expanding that. So we need to talk about that. We need to use the bully pulpit of the office of the governor to do that. We've had some reforms that the legislature has passed in the last few years in regard to what records can be available. We want to encourage people to hire a convicted felon. At the same time, we want to make sure that that is an appropriate position. For example, we would not want to change the law in the state of Ohio to say that the criminal record of someone would not be available in regard to if they were a sex offender. You would not want a sex offender being hired. You would want a nursery school to know that. So we have to be, my only point is we have to be very careful in how we do this. But the governor can lead. There are many businesses that are doing that. You're absolutely right. The number one complaint that I hear when I travel around the state of Ohio is we can't find people to work. I'll talk in a moment. I see the red light's on, but we'll talk a little bit more in regard to things that we want to do and plans about that.
Mr. Cordray, 90 seconds.
So Mike DeWine says a governor could lead. So could an attorney general lead. For the last 8 years, nothing has happened on criminal justice reform. Mike DeWine has been the chief law enforcement officer of the state, and his allies in the legislature have done nothing on this. We will have a hard time with criminal justice reform the way he's demagoguing issue one. You'd think issue one was the only issue in this race. There's many issues in this race. I have said that the one thing we can't do is double down on failure with Mike DeWine's fentanyl and opioid crisis that has blown up on his watch. Issue one is one possible answer. I support it. The Athens County prosecutors put forward a plan. I support it. The Franklin County prosecutor and city attorney in Columbus, friends of mine, put forward a plan. I support it. What I don't support is doubling down on failure with Mike DeWine. Reentry has been an issue for years, and in Ohio we've made no real progress on it, other than Governor Kasich has done a few things. We also need bail reform in Ohio. We need to think about individualized determinations of who's being held in jail. That's something we need to do in this state. I will push for criminal justice reform, but Mike DeWine is setting up a climate where nobody will touch criminal justice reform, and it's the wrong path for Ohio. It's too expensive to imprison everybody. It is too inhumane to put drug offenders with a drug problem in the prisons where they get no treatment and they come out with a felony on their record. They can't get a job, can't get a license, can't get a student loan. It's a bad path for Ohio, and we need change.
Mr. DeWine, 30 seconds for rebuttal.
Richard, we could have some reform, but issue one is a total disaster. And I continue to bring it up because to me it shows a lack of judgment. It shows a lack of good decision making. When you're lonely out there pretty much all by yourself. In addition to the things I said a moment ago, what's been a real success has been our drug courts. This will destroy our drug courts because there no longer will be a penalty there, nothing hanging over anybody's head. California did it and they lost 60% of the people going in.
Next question to Mr. Cordray from Jackie Borchert.
Relations between police and the communities they patrol have become strained in several parts of the state, including here in Cleveland. What would you do to help skeptical Ohioans, especially people of color, have more faith in law enforcement?
Well, I think first of all, we could work on things like criminal justice reform. He says we could have some reform. We haven't had any while he's Attorney General. Certainly doesn't deserve a promotion on that issue. We also need people to understand that we need fair policing, and that comes about through proper training, all right? When the Tamir Rice tragedy occurred in Cleveland, Mike DeWine's response was to say we need more police training. But what has he done? You know how much police training they're paying for this year in the Attorney General's office? 0 hours. 0 hours. So that's a promise that was made that hasn't been kept. His budget is $40 million higher this year than it was last year. 0 hours for police training. Our law enforcement need that training. This is probably one of the reasons why law enforcement in this state are endorsing me, not Mike DeWine in the governor's race, because they know that when it comes to being tough and effective on crime, he hasn't delivered. Both the Fraternal Order Police and the Patrolmen's Association have endorsed Rich Cordray in the governor's race because I will take on the opioid crisis. We will drive fentanyl out of Ohio. Fentanyl has run wild on his watch in Ohio, and it's pretty precious for him to talk about what we need to do about fentanyl, misrepresenting issue 1, which has nothing to do with drug trafficking laws. Anybody with 19 grams of fentanyl will be prosecuted and jailed under my watch as a drug trafficker in Ohio. But Mike DeWine has failed us on this issue. He's failed us on police training, and he's failed us across the board, which again is why law enforcement supports me in this race, not you, Mike.
Mr. DeWine.
I would invite anyone who's watching tonight to talk to your local county prosecuting attorney and to ask them whether someone who is in possession of drugs, let's take the fentanyl, let's say it's 19 grams, but where there's absolutely no other evidence except possession, if you think they can be charged with drug trafficking. Richard, the problem is you've never been a county prosecuting attorney and you don't know anything about it, and you're dead wrong. If you talk to prosecuting attorneys, what they will tell you is there's no place to go. And so that person with 19 grams, enough to kill 10,000, is that funny? 10,000 people?
It's laughable, your claim.
10,000 people, Richard. They will get no jail time. It will kill our drug courts. It's horrible. The other thing, let me talk for a moment about the group that we put together. We put 15 people together. It was citizens from throughout the state of Ohio. They came back with some amazing recommendations that we have implemented and are now part of the core curriculum. Things such as how you determine if someone is autistic, someone might have a mental health problem. That's a life and death thing. We are teaching that now. Implicit bias, something that every police officer should understand what their biases are. This is revolutionary. We did it by putting a citizens group together. I'm very, very proud of what they have done.
Mr. Cordray, 30 seconds for rebuttal.
Anybody with enough fentanyl to kill 10,000 people needs to be prosecuted for drug trafficking, and they would be, Mike. You just got that wrong, and the newspapers have said that claim on your part is an outright lie. And on police training, you promised police training after the Tremere Rise tragedy. That's what we need to solve these problems. You've got a curriculum. It's gathering dust on a shelf. If you're not going to pay for the training, nobody's going to take it. Your budget went up $40 million, but you provided no hours of training for law enforcement in the state. That doesn't get the job done.
Mr. DeWine, you've talked a lot about being a local government guy, even in this debate, but you also issued an opinion saying cities couldn't set their own minimum wage levels, and your campaign has said that you've outlined ways to assist local governments, but even you said here a few moments ago that you couldn't make any promises on the local government fund. So how can local governments be empowered to take on fighting the opioid crisis, funding public transit, and other responsibilities under these conditions?
We will be a good partner. We will work with them. Karen, what I'm not going to do is come in here and do what Mr. Cordray has done, and that's promise everything in the world to everybody. We don't know where that budget is going to be, but I will guarantee you, I understand about local government. What I talked about a moment ago and what we're going to do in regard to children's services is very, very significant. I understand police work. We have a plan that we will help every police department in the state of Ohio by using data. We have a state that is local government, 950 police departments, 88 county sheriffs. We like it that way. I happen to like it that way. I think it's good, but we have to have more help to those local departments, and we will be giving them that help. We will give our schools more help. For example, when you look at the problem of schools in regard to guns, in regard to a possible shooting in a school, we have a plan. We will provide that school with a mental health specialist. Every school in the state is going to get a mental health specialist, paid for by the state of Ohio. Every school in the state will get that type of assistance. We will also be up on the internet, and we will do this through a resource center that we have in Columbus and see if there are threats to that school. We have some schools that are doing that now. We will pay for that, and we will do that. So there's a lot of services. If our audience looks at our plan, you'll see a lot of things that we're doing for local government.
Mr. Cordray.
So I can't even really follow Mike's answer there. He's going to be a good partner, but it rings hollow because he's not willing to make any commitment. Yet somehow a sentence later he says there's going to be a lot of money. I can't add it all up. But I'll tell you what, he says he doesn't know where that budget is going to be. The first person who presents a budget next year is going to be the governor. And I know where that budget is going to be. I am going to be working to restore local government funds in Ohio. That is my commitment. If he thinks that's an irresponsible commitment, then he's not really willing to be a partner with local governments in this state. And what does this mean? Everybody thinks it's just nameless, faceless government. It's okay for the state to take their money and nobody will care. It drives people back to the ballot to raise local sales tax and local property tax, which hurts local economies further. It hurts the ability to fight the opioid crisis. We take those resources out of the community and don't bring them back. How are we going to do something extra, like fight the worst opioid crisis in the nation? Sorry, second worst. West Virginia's even worse. And how are you going to protect the safety forces, the police and firefighters who are having to be cut because this money is going to Columbus and it's a rainy day museum? Look but don't touch. You know, we need to rethink what we're doing in the state of Ohio. We need to be a real partner to local governments. We need to be able and willing to make these commitments, and I am willing to make them. That's called leadership. To tell us, I'll be a good partner, we'll see, maybe down the road, that's not leadership. That's waiting till after the election to try to address the problems.
Mr. DeWine.
Richard, you've never led in any office you've held. You had a mess in Washington, 25% of minority, 25% of women. A GEAO report said that they felt discriminated against. It was described as a toxic environment. When you were Attorney General, you left the old rape kits sitting out there, close to 12,000 of them. You never tested a one. I had to test them. When I came into office, BCI was a mess. We fixed it, and we have changed it. You didn't touch it. You were 125 days behind.
We need to move on. Next question to Mr. Cordray from Jerry Repish.
Mr. Cordray, you say you want to reform Ohio's education system. Among your plans is a call to reduce the number of standardized tests students take.
That's right.
How much testing would you eliminate, and what metric would you use to determine whether a student is actually learning anything?
So there's a number of things that we need to do to improve education in Ohio. I've talked already about my early childhood learning program, which I think is quite important. We can't have kids get to K and already be well behind in the state of Ohio. But in K through 12, there's two things we need to do in particular. We need to think about the funding of our schools, and we need to think about what actually goes on in the classroom. On the funding of the schools, we need to get the money back from failing charter schools. They were so indulgent of ECOT. They so looked the other way. They were getting millions of dollars in campaign contributions, tens of thousands to my opponent, tens of thousands to his running mate, some of which has not yet been returned or given to charity. That money needs to come back into the schools. But what happens in the classroom, Jerry, is we've had way too many unfunded mandates laid on the classroom in Ohio, and they've piled up over the years. We have too much standardized testing, high-stakes standardized testing. Nobody does that when they get out into the workforce. We need to rethink our approach. And by the way, the ones who are telling me the most about this are our teachers. Our teachers are trained to teach. They need to have Columbus lay off and give them more latitude so that they can teach effectively. And some of these things, the school report cards, the school district report cards, they're almost cartoonish, and I don't really understand what purpose some of those are serving. But we will reduce testing to the federal minimum, and then we will look to see if we can get some waivers to reduce it further. Because teachers tell me there's so much time out of the classroom, there's so much time spent preparing for the test, they can't engage the students and create the magic in our classrooms that has raised all of us in Ohio.
Let's move on to Mr. DeWine, 90 seconds.
We have found something that Richard and I agree on, and that has to do if there's too much testing. When you talk to teachers, when you talk to students, when you talk to parents, needs to be less testing, needs to be more learning. Fran and I have 8 children. One of our youngest son is a teacher, his wife is a teacher, and so we see some of these things through their eyes as well. Early childhood development is the most important thing that we can do. That's why we have a plan to triple the number of home visits to at-risk moms. Meet that mother, talk to that mother, go into her home when she is pregnant with that child, help her with nutrition, help her with education, help her to become a mom, help her to do what needs to be done to prepare that child to go to school. Our challenge in this state is that we need to get kids ready for kindergarten. We need them to be at the starting line. That should be our goal. Some kids are coming into kindergarten, they have half the vocabulary of other kids. We have to change that. That's why we have a very dynamic plan to do that. We also will improve early childhood education. The state is paying for some early childhood education. The tragedy is that 80% of that is not excellent, it's not high quality, and we know from statistics that it has to be high quality or it does not really make the difference. More on education later. I'm out of time.
Mr. CORDRAY, 30 seconds for rebuttal.
So I am glad that you have agreed with our plan on K through 12, Mike, and I think we've also agreed on early childhood. So that's two good things. Where we haven't agreed is the mess and the scandal in state government that is ECOT. $186 million stolen from the state of Ohio on your watch. No accountability for a school that had a 39% graduation rate, and you did not file a lawsuit until you actually were running for governor, and all the money was gone, and we will not get that money back on your watch. Maybe some future attorney general will do something about it.
Next question, Jackie Borchert to Mr. DeWine.
Ohio spent just $40 million last year on public transportation, less than 1/3 the recommended amount. And local transit authorities are facing a loss of $209 million in sales tax revenue next year. In what would be your first state budget? What role should state government play in supporting mass transit? And how will you ensure access to public transportation that meets Ohio's needs?
The state has to play a role. The state has to be a good partner. I will do what I will do in other areas, and that is I'm a very good listener. I'm someone who travels the state a lot. I will be in every community. We will listen to what the leadership of Cleveland, for example, says about that. One of the big problems that we see is people who live in one area, but their jobs are another. They are poor. They do not have the transportation. So that has to be a real focus. Now, one of the things that John Houston and I want to do, that Mr. CORDRAY apparently is against, but is to double down on the enterprise zones, because what we can do by having the enterprise zones and opportunity zones is encourage businesses to invest in those, and you will have the jobs there in the area where people are. That makes a huge, huge difference. I want to respond for a moment in regard to ECOT. Richard is wrong about ECOT. I'm the only person, again, on this stage who has taken action against ECOT. And it was not when the election started, Richard. It was well before that. I took action. I sued ECOT. Richard did not. I have been all over ECOT. We have won at every stage of the case all the way through. No action could not really be taken until the Department of Education made a decision. Once they did that, we filed suit, and we're all over it.
Mr. CORDRAY.
You're all over it, but the $186 million is somewhere else and not in the state's coffers. The question was on public transit, and all I heard you say was the state has to play a role, but you won't tell us what it is. I've said very specifically what I'll do. We will put a bonded finance package on the ballot for the voters to approve. They've approved infrastructure 4 times in the last 30 years. Revolutionary, for the first time, we will support public transit as part of that. We will get that in place. Why is it important? Because we need to make that investment in Ohio. Half the states have that investment, we don't. But secondly, we need to get that in place because eventually the federal government, which promised infrastructure but hasn't delivered, will bring it and bring funding. If we have our plan already in place now, while interest rates are low, which is the smart thing to do, there likely will be state and local match on that federal program. We'll have our ducks in a row, and we'll be able to leverage the maximum federal funds to really build public transit in the state. But to have 27 counties where there's no public transit, you can't get from home to work unless you have an operating vehicle, is unacceptable in Ohio. And we need to think about that, particularly in our cities. We know public transit is a crying need. We've never financed it. To say that the state has to play a role, but he's not willing to do anything. I've heard him talk about blue ribbon commissions, which is another excuse for I'm not ready to lead, but we'll tell you about it sometime after the election. Doesn't get the job done for places like Cleveland, who need to see a commitment and leadership from the state government on this. And I have a very specific approach that Betty Sutton and I have laid out that will help us get this done.
Time's up.
Richard,
Mr. DeWine, 30 seconds.
You spend most of your time on the attack instead of talking really about what you think should be done in the state of Ohio. And again, you continue to mislead people on ECOT and so many other things. ECOT was something that you could have taken action on. There was a auditor's report which clearly showed that there was a problem, and you did absolutely nothing at that time.
Mr. Cordray, several people from around Ohio submitted questions to the Ohio Debate Commission regarding abortion, specifically the law in the state to defund Planned Parenthood, which is now in federal court, as is the ban on abortions after a Down syndrome diagnosis. If you win as governor, it's possible and even likely that you'll be working with a Republican-led legislature, which has helped pass some of these laws, actually has enacted these laws. With this in mind and the confirmation of Judge Brett Kavanaugh now on the Supreme Court, how would you keep your promise to protect reproductive rights?
Okay, the first thing I will do is I will protect reproductive rights. Betty Sutton and I will protect them in this state. Mike DeWine has had no respect for those rights. He's gone so far now as to say no exceptions even for rape or incest. That's too extreme for Ohio. This legislature has passed 21 restrictions on a woman's right to choose in the last 7 years. And Mike DeWine has cheerled them all and defended them all, even the ones that were unconstitutional, either ones where you and I ended up paying attorney's fees to the party out of taxpayer monies. I will tell the legislature, don't bring those bills to my desk because I will veto them. He has said he will sign a heartbeat bill. That heartbeat bill will set back the business climate in the state because it's too extreme. John Kasich vetoed it, but Mike DeWine has said he will sign it. A woman's right to choose is something, and to make their own health decisions is something we should be protecting in Ohio, and I will protect it. Let me say what else. If we get this out of the way, this obsessive, manic obsession with defunding Planned Parenthood, taking away health care there, and restrictions on abortion, we can actually make progress on maternal health issues where the legislature has neglected them. Prenatal care, postnatal care, infant mortality, which we know is a crisis in this state, particularly in the African American community. The legislature has done nothing about it. We need to reprogram them in a different direction so they can be more helpful in terms of helping the state move forward on real problems that we're experiencing right now.
Mr. DeWine, you have 90 seconds.
Karen, thank you. I'm pro-life. As you know, Fran, I have 8 children. We value human life, as all people do, whether they have children or don't have children. But I believe that the essential function of government is to protect the most vulnerable members of society. That includes the unborn. It includes moms who are in very difficult situation. It includes babies who, because the mom doesn't have the right nutrition or is taking drugs or other things. So you're going to see an administration, and we talked about this already before, that's going to spend a lot of time and a lot of focus and put significant money on early childhood development, but we're going to start it with home visits early on. We're going to take this from covering, we only now cover with home visits 4% of the eligible women in the state of Ohio. We're going to take that the first year from 4% to 12%. We will do more than that as we go forward because I truly believe how we take care of those kids early on and how we help moms and dads take care of those kids, moms and dads who are in difficult circumstances, is going to make a huge, huge difference for that child, for that family, and for the rest of the state.
Mr. Cordray, 30 seconds for rebuttal.
We agree about taking care of kids early on. Where we don't agree is your extreme agenda that even in cases of rape and incest, a woman could not exercise her right to choose. A 15-year-old gets raped by her uncle and she'd have to carry that child to term, that fetus to term, because you as a man are going to dictate to her from Columbus and say that this is the way it has to be for everyone. That's wrong. That is not respecting rights. That is trampling on people's rights. Grown women have the ability to make their own decisions. They should be respected in the right to do that. It's been honored in the U.S. Constitution, and it should be upheld in Ohio.
Next question to Mr. DeWine from Jerry Ravish.
Mr. DeWine, you would freeze tuition so students would pay the same price they're charged as freshmen for all 4 years of college. Would you increase state funding to colleges and universities whose budgets may be too tight to accomplish that?
Jerry, I think that the people who we appoint to the board, and one of the most solemn responsibilities of a governor is to appoint people to the board of trustees or state universities, need to understand that young people cannot pay what they've been paying, and that the debt that is piling up on young people is wrong. We have to start running our universities more like a business. Now, they're not exactly a business, but there's a lot of parts of them that are. And so having people in there who understand that is very important. What you're seeing in the state of Ohio at most state universities today and at private universities is they are reinventing themselves. They're figuring out how can we get by. Some of them are going out and trying to get transfer students. Some of them are looking at people who are not typical college age and are making a real pitch for them. Those are the type of things that have to be done if our colleges are going to continue to be good in the state of Ohio, and if they're going to be able to supply for a reasonable price what the students need. So it's the ability to adapt, it's the ability to modernize, it's the ability to take new technology to the heights that needs to be done. And that's what the leadership of these colleges have to have, these universities have to have.
Mr. CORDRAY.
Let me talk about the pattern of what we've seen tonight, and we've seen it in all these debates. Time and again, we have an issue, an important issue. And Mike DeWine's comment is, somebody will figure it out later on. I don't know what we're going to do. Somebody will decide. I'll name an opioid czar. Somehow they'll solve the opioid crisis. I'll name people to the boards of regents, and somehow they'll figure out how we keep costs down. I'll name somebody to be a partner with local government. We don't know what we're going to do for them. The state has to play a role in public transit, but I don't know what that role is. Governor's office is about leadership. The governor sets the agenda. Then the governor has to work with the legislature to implement that agenda, but there's a lot the governor can do on his or her own, and that's important, all right? On the issue of higher education, I have said we need to have more 2+2 programs, working with the community colleges to make college more affordable. We need to work to get more college credits available to students in high school so they can get a head start on this. Our great community colleges are an excellent alternative for people, a very affordable alternative, and we can invest more in them. We can also work as a state to optimize federal student grants and loans, make sure we're pulling down every dollar for families who really don't know how to navigate this. Many of them don't even fill out the FAFSA. We should have universal FAFSA completion in Ohio. That will help make college more affordable and more accessible to people. There's much that we can do, but the governor has to lead. The governor has to have plans. The governor has to be willing to spend political capital to implement those plans. It's not enough to say somebody will figure it out someday. We need more concrete approaches.
Move back to Mr. DeWine for 30 seconds for a rebuttal.
Sure. Richard, you have not led in any job that you've ever had. What about, tell that to the rape victims who, right?
Right.
Right.
Tell
that to the rape victims. You didn't start on that. There were 12,000 of them.
You know that I got started on that.
One of the things that I think is important is, and I will do as governor, is every state university, we're going to not only judge that state university on how many people they graduate, what %, but I think that we can start looking to see where those students are a year after they graduate. I think we should judge them by that, and it's important.
Now, unfortunately, we don't have time for another full round of questions. We only have 2 minutes left here approximately before we get to closing statements, so you each have 30 seconds to answer this question, and it comes at a perfect time after that exchange. I will start with Mr. CORDRAY. Can you say something that... It's his turn. Can you say something that you like about your opponent, like or admire about your opponent in 30 seconds?
Yeah, I know that Mike DeWine has always been a family man. I respect that about him. I'm a family man myself. As I said, this is not personal between him and me. To me, this is about how we're going to lead the state of Ohio. It's about all of us. That's what's at stake here. It's not whether Mike DeWine and I like or don't like something about one another. That's really not very important. What's important is how do we move forward so that Ohio makes progress? How do we move forward so that we solve these problems? How do we present the voters with alternatives so that they can know we're going to improve their lives? That's what I'm all about.
All right, Mr. DeWine, you have about 30 seconds to...
I think Richard's a great family man. I will tell you an anecdote. When I won the election, a close election against Richard the last time we ran against each other, he was very good in the transition, did absolutely everything that he could do to make the transition smooth.
All right. Leading on ending on a little bit of a positive civil note here. So let's go now to closing statements here, and we'll start with you, Mr. DeWine.
Well, thank you very much. I run for governor because I know that I can make a difference. Throughout my career, I've been able to take problems on and to fix those problems. And the way I've done it is to bring people together. And I've brought Democrats, Republicans, Independents, and got them together. I did it in the United States Senate on children's health issues, for example, foster care adoption. I have done it as the Attorney General on the rape kit initiative. I worked with Tim McGinty, Democrat, prosecuting attorney here in Cuyahoga County, along with the sheriff, along with the chief of police and the police department, We got those cases. We worked together to get those cases prosecuted. I have done the same thing with Sheriff Tharp, the sheriff in Lucas County. Sheriff Tharp, a Democrat, called me a couple years ago and said, I have a plan. I want to help get people who are at the hospital, who have overdosed. I want to get them from the emergency room, but I want to get them into a real good program for treatment. We worked together on that. It's been an amazing thing together. I worked with the former Democrat treasurer in Cuyahoga County in regard to a program that Albert Ratner also, Jim Rackauckus was the person who suggested it. He and I worked together to deal with the cancer that's been on our neighborhoods when our buildings and houses are falling apart. We had a program, it made a big difference.
That's going to have to be your last word, Mr. CORDRAY.
Thank you to the people here at Cleveland State, to everyone here and everyone watching. Mike, I've enjoyed the 3 debates that we've had. These have been good conversations about the future of Ohio, and I don't think it should end there. I think the people of Toledo would like to see us debate there. I have been willing to say that I will go and have a debate there. I'd like to invite you to join me there next week. I think the people and voters of Toledo deserve that. Now, I've said many times that this race is about who you stand up to and who you stand up for. I have always stood up for people who have been abused or mistreated by predatory, powerful interests, and I always will. In Ohio, I stood up for our pension systems against Wall Street to protect taxpayers and retirees, and we beat them. We were effective. I stood up for brave servicemen and women who serve our country at the Consumer Bureau to make sure that they were not victims of financial predators, and we took them on and we beat them. I faced down the big financial companies to protect consumers and put $12 billion back in the pockets of 30 million Americans. You want to talk about my record there? That's what I did, Mike. Betty Sutton and I will move this state forward. On health care, we will make it more accessible and more affordable, and no one will be denied coverage based on pre-existing conditions. Skills training, support for small businesses, and beating the opioid epidemic. Tomorrow is the last day to register to vote, and Wednesday early vote begins. Betty Sutton and I respectfully ask for your vote, a vote to step into our future, a vote to put Ohio families ahead of special interests, and a vote that counts.
That's the end. That's the last word. Mr. CORDRAY, Mr. DeWine, thank you very much for participating tonight. Audience, you can applaud now if you'd like.
Hey, Richard. Thank you.
All right, a little bit of business here. Okay. I need to remind you there are 2 additional candidates vying for the governor's seat, Libertarian Travis Irvine and Constance Goodell Newton running as a Green Party candidate. All 4 gubernatorial candidates have been invited to participate in a City Club of Cleveland forum on Monday, October 15th. You have been tuned in to the Ohio Gubernatorial Debate 2018, brought to you by the Ohio Debate Commission. On behalf of my colleagues, Jerry Revish from WBNS 10 TV in Columbus and Jackie Borchert from the Cincinnati Enquirer, I'd like to thank our studio audience and everyone who tuned in to the live stream this evening. I'm Karen Kassler. Thank you much, and good night.
Nice to be with you tonight.
Sunday mornings, take an in-depth look at your community. In Focus with Mike Kallmeyer, a half-hour show dedicated to the important issues.
We're going to instantly see the results.
Driven to bring decision makers together.
I can both probably relate to that.
And committed to elevating discussion and debate. Your community, your state, your show.
If people are talking about it, so are we.
In Focus with Mike Kallmeyer, Sunday mornings at 10:30 on Spectrum Sports.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us for Decision 2018, Spectrum News and Cleveland.com's special coverage of the third and final gubernatorial debate. I'm Sophia Constantine. We begin tonight with a brief overview of some of the candidates' backgrounds. Richard Cordray served as Ohio's Attorney General from 2009 to 2011. He lost the office to Mike DeWine in a wave election that Republicans took nearly all statewide positions. Cordray went on to serve in the Obama administration as the director of the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau. The job put him in the crosshairs of Republicans who bitterly opposed the creation of the agency and fought hard to block Cordray's confirmation. His actions at the Bureau are just a few of the many issues that have led Cordray and DeWine to throw jabs at each other during this contentious campaign. Joining me now to share their thoughts with us on tonight's debate is cleveland.com's Jeremy Pelzer. Jeremy, thank you so much for being here tonight.
Hey, wouldn't miss it.
All right, so I'm curious to know just some of your initial and overall thoughts. We'll dive deeper into some of the individual topics as we go throughout the night, but just general overview thoughts.
I think it was at once a lot less freewheeling, perhaps, than the first couple of debates. And both candidates, they were just basically giving their closing arguments to voters about why they should vote for them. They weren't afraid to go at each other, but at the same time, I feel it was a lot kind of, maybe it was a format, but it was a little bit more comfortable and a less kind of on guard, perhaps, than the first two debates.
I agree. The setting was very different than the first two. So do you think that played into the tone?
Yeah, they were just sitting around a table talking about the issues of the day, how to save the world. I think there was a lot of issues that they were talking about that were kind of within their wheelhouse. Abortion and school funding, and they actually found some things to agree with. That's pretty neat.
Absolutely.
All right.
Actually, I really liked how it ended, where the moderators asked them to find something that they liked about each other, if you will. I thought that was a neat way to end the third and final debate.
And maybe the media makes too much of it because, we do like to see them going at each other. And, we are from the Midwest where we're, this isn't like a New Jersey political debate or something like that. But at the same time, they were wearing their velvet boxing gloves tonight.
Absolutely, I agree. All right, so I want to ask, the first question tonight had to do with health care, and we knew that would be a big topic tonight, considering the location. So how big of a role do you think health care will play in this election?
I think for voters, it's probably up there with Trump as maybe the number one issue in the election. I know, a lot of viewers tonight might think differently, but I think in terms of, if you look at the polls, if you look at even Google search results, there's a lot of objective information showing that healthcare is going to be a huge issue in this election. And that's why right out of the gate you had these questions about pre-existing conditions and Obamacare and how to cover people who might be affected by Obamacare being rolled back or
the Affordable Care Act being repealed.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Okay, I have to ask, any surprises? Anything that really jumped out at you tonight?
Nah, I mean, they could go on a barnstorming tour at this point, and just going around the state, going at each other. I think by this point, they're pretty comfortable in their policy positions and where they stand vis-a-vis each other.
Okay, and so the two candidates throughout this whole process have been very critical of each other. I have to ask, do you think that Donald Trump has taught candidates that voters want to see a fighter?
Well, in this era of Donald Trump, I think it's a lot more about personality. And it's interesting because these are two candidates that are they're not just personality-driven candidates. Sure, they have a personality, but they're a lot about the issues, they're a lot about policy. And it's kind of interesting that neither of these guys are, the campaigns might disagree on this, but neither are really the change candidate. They both have a long history in government. The voters have both seen them on the ballot before. There's no one's coming out of left field.
Right.
These are two established political veterans who are looking to take over. And that's good for the state, but as far as politics goes, in an era of Donald Trump, you don't have kind of a new maverick, out of the blue, here's what I can do for you personality.
Considering they have both such a long history in politics, do you think that is actually helping them or hurting them?
I think it's good for Ohio. I think these are two candidates who are both qualified to be governor of the state of Ohio. I think most people would say that. You can disagree with them on the issues, of course, and that's good for Ohio.
All right, Jeremy, thank you so much. We're going to talk more with you later throughout the evening. And of course, we really appreciate you for being here.
Thanks so much.
Joining us now is Curtis Jackson, who is live in Cleveland. And Curtis, you're with cleveland.com senior politics reporter
Sophia,
Seth Richardson.
joined now by Seth Richardson here with the cleveland.com, also a political reporter. And Seth, we saw it all run the gamut tonight, from healthcare to local government funding to education to abortion. Not too many surprises here, even a couple of times where these guys agreed, especially as it related to education testing. How do you grade their overall performance tonight?
Well, I'm sure supporters of DeWine probably think DeWine won, and supporters of CORDRAY probably think CORDRAY won, and I guess in a way, they're both right. Both candidates kind of did what they needed to do. Anybody who's been watching the governor's race thus far probably saw a lot of familiar lines in there and really recognized what was going on. But anybody who's watching for the first time got, a good rundown of where the candidates stand and what issues they think are important. So I would say that both did pretty well, all things considered. Nobody screwed up to the point where there's going to be some massive headline and they're going to be ducking and covering from the press. So I guess you can give them both an A.
If you were looking at this as a voter who is checking in on the first time as we get closer to the election, one of the things that certainly stood out was the discussion of abortion. DeWine not backing away from his support for the heartbeat bill, not backing away from his belief that there is no exception for abortion as it relates to incest or rape. How impactful do you think that kind of conversation is going to be, especially as the panelists raised here after the confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh?
Well, it's interesting that in two debates now he's talked about abortion. He's talked about his support for the heartbeat bill and no exceptions for rape and incest and all that. But he's taken a really roundabout way to kind of get there. He's sort of tiptoed through the fields to finally get to his destination there. And I think that is telling, because you look at the political environment right now. You have women very, activated. They're eager to vote. They are out there. They're the ones who are being the activists. And this issue of abortion, a lot of women are really worried, especially with Kavanaugh on the court, that abortion rights could be restricted. So it's telling to me that he's kind of answering it the way that he is, where he's not just going head on and taking it straight on, but he's getting there eventually.
These are core issues for each of their respective parties. So I guess if you're the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, you have to be somewhat relieved at this point that the conversation isn't at these more extreme levels, but it is at these core issues that say, I'm on the right and I'm on the left.
Yeah, it's got to be a relief for them. The one exception to that might be healthcare. You can see that, DeWine is a little uncomfortable talking about it just because of the way the discussion is going right now nationally. So he tries to get in that, yes, I've had these votes for healthcare, and don't necessarily pay attention to the numerous lawsuits or anything from the past, and it's his way of kind of getting around that. And you can tell that he was a little uncomfortable whenever he was asked the healthcare question, the same as in the first debate. He's gotten a little more confidence now and kind of come out and said, no, I've always been for pre-existing conditions. I've sponsored or supported bills in the past when I was in the Senate, but I'm sure he was probably pretty happy that was a really short part of the debate.
Let me ask you this. Granted, they are both speaking to their bases, and they're both getting the response from their bases. But what's going to turn this election is going to be those independents out there, those moderates, those undecideds. Did they hear anything tonight that would say, okay, that's my guy?
I think if you look at how you have to run in Ohio is you have to walk a tightrope. You have to, be just enough to one side where your base is still going to stay with you, but, palatable enough that the middle is going to be with you too. And I think when you listen to both of these candidates, really just their demeanor even doesn't, strike anyone as extreme. Some of their positions can be very far right and very far left, but the way that they present those issues is kind of what gives people some calm. Oh, these guys are rational and whatnot, and they're political wonks, they're nerdy, they're not screaming and yelling at each other. So I think if you look at performance, that is probably what is going to make people in the middle a little more comfortable. Now, it's going to vary issue by issue. Are more conservative voters probably going to lean Mike DeWine? Yeah, of course. Are more liberal voters going to probably skew CORDRAY? Sure. But I think both of them, what they're trying to do right now is play that game where we have our issues on each side, but we want to be palatable just enough to the middle, and to do that, they're just trying to be the nicest guy they can about it.
Another thriller in vanilla.
To say the least.
Thanks a lot, Seth. So as you can see, we have got a lot of analysis here, and we're going to be taking a look at all of these things as we go through the night. Certainly a lot going on in terms of them both speaking to their bases, but that question is, how will the undecideds respond to either of these guys? Sophia?
All right, our Curtis Jackson there live in Cleveland. Thank you for that live report. We're joined now again by Jeremy Pelzer. I'm curious for your thoughts on the abortion topic discussed tonight. Both of the candidates really differ. They're either on one side or the other. And so in a sense, I feel like this should make it easier for voters to help pick their candidate.
Did you see how at ease they both were when they were asked? They were asked about net neutrality. They were like, oh, what? But when you asked about abortion, they're like, oh, this is right in their wheelhouse. Right. Mike DeWine has been a staunch opponent of abortion for decades. He knows where he stands on it. Rich Cordray is supportive of abortion rights. He knows exactly where he stands on it. If abortion is your number one issue, it should not be hard for you to decide.
On election
it should
day,
not be hard to decide between these two.
Okay, and considering all the jabs tonight, do you think that this really helped voters pick one way or the other?
Well, odds are if you're watching right now, either you know who you're going to vote for. Maybe you thought you were going to get some sports coverage and are wondering what we're doing here. But most people who watched this debate exactly knew who they were going to vote for going in. The only reason that they would see this more moderate, undecided voters is if someone really screwed up, and then they can broadcast that out. And I don't think anyone really screwed up tonight.
So you don't think anybody really changed their mind about who they're voting for tonight?
You might have some people who are kind of soft lean and be like, okay, I heard what I wanted to, but they didn't say anything really tonight that they hadn't really said before. So no, I think this just kind of hardened people more than swayed them to change their mind.
All right, Jeremy, thank you so much for your input. Let's check in now with Spectrum News State House reporter Molly Martinez, who's in Cleveland. Molly?
Sophia, we're here in the spin room where in about 20 minutes we're expecting DeWine, and at 8:40 we are expecting CORDRAY. Now, this is the third debate we've seen, so they had their dukes up, but they were also anticipating some of the punches coming their way. Tonight, they talked a lot about Issue 1. That was sort of the sword that DeWine is choosing to fall on. Issue 1 would take people out of prison for low-level offenses and sort of divert that funding into treatment. He's saying that this is going to be horrible for our prison system, that we need this. CORDRAY is for it. It's a divisive issue. I spoke to political scientist Paul Beck, who works at OSU. He actually had a question tonight, and he estimates that 1/3 of the state budget goes towards prison funding. So that is a huge expenditure. That Issue 1, that's going to be left up to voters in Ohio, and that is the only statewide ballot measure. Also on it, we talked about transportation tonight. That's something that we haven't necessarily heard in these other debates. CORDRAY saying that 27 counties currently don't have any public transportation systems. We're going to ask him about that when he gets in here in the spin room. Also, what we heard tonight is what they agreed on. This is kind of a nice change of pace from their sparring that we're used to. They both say they agree that there needs to be more focus on early childhood spending, early childhood development, and education for young children. Also, they both seem to agree on the foster care program and the need to make that more robust and more accessible to people who would like to foster children. All right, so we're going to wait for these candidates now. For now, I'm going to send it back to you in the press room. I'm Molly Martinez, Spectrum News.
All right, Molly, thank you so much for that live report from Cleveland. Coming up, we'll continue our post coverage of the final gubernatorial debate. Stay with us.
Sunday mornings, take an in-depth look at your community. In Focus with Mike Kallmeyer, a half-hour show dedicated to the important issues.
We're going to instantly see the results.
Driven to bring decision makers together.
I can both probably relate to that.
And committed to elevating discussion and debate. Your community, your state, your show.
If people are talking about it, so are we.
In Focus with Mike Kallmeyer, Sunday mornings at 10:30 on Spectrum Sports.
There are two kind of coaches, those that have been fired and those that are going to get fired.
Here I am, I'm the big man on campus, in comes this new coach, and the first day of practice, he kicks me out.
Can you even describe what it's like to go 240 miles an hour?
Every day, there's something that happens that'll make me think about Woody Hayes.
Friday nights are for high school football. And no one covers your teams like Spectrum Sports. With live look-ins at the biggest games across the state, to top analysis with the pros. From kickoff to the final whistle, this is your Friday Night Huddle. High School Blitz, live, Friday nights starting at 7 on Spectrum Sports, exclusively on Spectrum.
This is it. Your big break. Your one shot. Your only chance. There are two outcomes. Make history or be history.
The home of high school sports. Spectrum Sports. Exclusively on Spectrum.
It's been an exciting night so far. Welcome back to Spectrum News and cleveland.com special coverage of Ohio's third and final gubernatorial debate. Joining me now is cleveland.com actually, we are going to go live to Cleveland, where our Curtis Jackson has more analysis on tonight's debate. Curtis?
Sophia, I am joined by one of the best political analysts here in Northeast Ohio, also a very good friend. Good to see him again. This is Tom Sutton from Baldwin Wallace College. And Tom, let's just start with you.
Sure.
What did you see tonight?
Well, what I saw was two practiced politicians doing very well in a debate format. They certainly had a lot of practice. They were in a close race. You could see that in what they said, how they went after each other. A little bit more restrained than maybe what we saw in the first debate, but definitely getting at the issues that they saw as being their issues to run on. Some questions got moved a little bit towards what they favored saying, a lot of it being attacks on each other, which again is something that we would expect in a debate like this.
But even with those attacks, these are two pretty mild-mannered guys here.
They are. I mean, this is their nature. I mean, both of them are, we might say, policy wonks. They're more interested in the details of policy. They're not necessarily effective campaigners. They're never going to light up a room with their charisma like a Bill Clinton or somebody like that. But really, they do have distinctive differences, and I think that's a lot of what they were trying to highlight tonight in this debate. Not so much liberal and conservative, but more really about what do they think Ohioans want and need in a governor.
And these are traditional Ohio voters that they're speaking to. Unfortunately for both of these guys, they're not going to get there until they reach these moderates.
Absolutely.
Did you hear any message tonight from either one of them that suggests, yeah, I'm making this connection?
Well, I heard from DeWine more of a law and order approach, particularly on the issue of Issue 1, where he's opposed to Issue 1 and the reasons why. I think those that are very much on the pro-life side, they heard very much what they wanted from DeWine, and just like that, on the other side, those that were pro-choice heard what they wanted from CORDRAY. I think the other part of the moderate was the nuts and bolts kinds of things, where I think maybe CORDRAY maybe had a little bit of an edge. When he talked about infrastructure spending, when he talked about net neutrality, when he talked about K through 12 education, they both come together on early childhood education. No concern about that on either side. They largely agree. But I think I would give the edge to CORDRAY when it comes to some of those other issues that are the ones that the moderates are really paying attention to.
Would it be safe to say that both of these gentlemen, as they near the stretch here, are going to need some help? They're going to need some star power to come in and sort of and light up their base and also attract some of these moderates?
Oh, absolutely. And I think you're going to see with Trump coming to Ohio, that's very much going to be focused on really the governor's race, even more perhaps than the Senate race, because the point spread is so far between Renacci and Brown. And on the Democratic side, I think we're going to see people coming in, but they have to be careful because the star power on the Democratic side is not nearly as lit because, in fact, they don't have the White House, they don't have majorities. So I really think in some ways, CORDRAY is going to benefit from the star power of Sherrod Brown running for re-election, and that's going to be his advantage.
As these gentlemen get to the point of making their closing arguments across the state, we've always talked about this. One of the best things that you do is geography, right? Where in Ohio these gentlemen need to be. I'll go each one. Where does CORDRAY need to be? He's fine in the cities. Where does he need to be that's going to allow him to attract some different voters?
CORDRAY needs to take a page out of the Strickland playbook in 2006, and it was the same playbook that Sherrod Brown is. He needs to go into those rural areas and he needs to talk from the moderate perspective about what in real terms he will do, particularly about the opioid crisis. I think that's what's on the topmost of everybody's minds. Second to that really is about the healthcare issue in general, and he really needs to push the positions that he took tonight. For DeWine, I think in some ways it's the same areas. It's the small towns, it's the rural, that's where he's strong. In the cities, he can talk about the opioid crisis as being the former Attorney General, and he may get some play there because, again, cities have been hit just as much as the rural areas, perhaps even worse, and he can really talk about what he thinks should be done regarding to drug courts and his law and order approach when it comes to things like fentanyl, which, quite frankly, I think he might have an edge on over CORDRAY.
Always a pleasure, Tom.
Great
Thanks
to talk
for
with you.
Tonight.
Take care.
Cecilia, back to you.
All right, our Curtis Jackson there live in Cleveland. Thank you so much for that live report. Candidates Mike DeWine and Richard CORDRAY were asked a series of questions, of course, during tonight's debate, and we're going to have a chance to listen to some of their answers and hear our panelists' reaction. The first question we're going to review is a topic that wasn't brought up during the first two debates. The candidates were asked, if elected, what would you do to have more people of color trust law enforcement? Let's listen to their responses.
First of all, we could work on things like criminal justice reform. He says we could have some reform. We haven't had any while he's Attorney General. Certainly doesn't deserve a promotion on that issue. We also need people to understand that we need fair policing, and that comes about through proper training, all right? When the Tamir Rice tragedy occurred in Cleveland, Mike DeWine's response was to say we need more police training. But what has he done? You know how much police training they're paying for this year in the Attorney General's office? 0 hours. 0 hours. So that's a promise that was made that hasn't been.
I invite anyone who's watching tonight to talk to your local county prosecuting attorney and to ask them whether someone who is in possession of drugs, let's take the fentanyl, let's say it's 19 grams, but where there's absolutely no other evidence except possession, if you think they can be charged with drug trafficking. Richard, the problem is you've never been a county prosecuting attorney and you don't know anything about it, and you're dead wrong. If you talk to prosecuting attorneys, what they will tell you is there's no place to go. And so that person with 19 grams, enough to kill 10,000, is that funny? 10,000 people?
It's laughable, your claim.
10,000 people, Richard. They will get no jail time. It will kill our drug courts. It's horrible.
It seemed like that happened in several of the questions. Mike DeWine seems to keep bringing up issue one time and time again, so I think that will play into his voters.
Yeah, and Rich CORDRAY just went on the attack. I mean, if the question was, how do you have people of color, minority communities, minority Ohioans trust law enforcement, we didn't really get much of an answer from either of them.
Right.
Mike DeWine is Attorney General. Under his watch, there has been an increase in training hours, as suggested by John Kasich, who brought together a police community relations training force.
Yes.
So that's happened. But I mean, if you're talking about funding for that, a lot of that is in the hands of state lawmakers, and a lot of that they funded that by taking money away from, guess what, local governments.
Yeah.
So yeah, there is things that can be done from it, but we didn't really hear too much on that from them tonight.
Well, talking about funding, there was lots of talk tonight about policy proposals and not a lot of talk concerning funding those proposals. So is that concerning to you?
Yeah, I mean, Mike DeWine went after CORDRAY on a bunch of stuff, saying, well, you're going to promise the world, but, you're not saying, are you going to pay for it? Well, and CORDRAY said, we're going to, improve early childhood education. Didn't really say I was going to pay for it. He was saying, oh, we're going to bump up local government funding. Didn't really say I was going to pay for it. But DeWine isn't innocent in this either, because he said, oh, we're going to improve local early childhood education too. He didn't say I was going to pay for it. So there was, I don't think it's unique to this election that you have a lot of politicians making promises without giving a lot of details, and that was certainly the case tonight.
So early voting begins in just 2 days. Of course, November 6th election day is just a month away. That's not
Get your advent calendars out.
Right, yeah, it's not very far, just a few weeks. So what will the candidates need to do in the next few weeks to get those last undecided voters?
This is a neck-and-neck race. Polls show this within the margin of error. Part of it is that it's going to be a referendum on Trump and national issues. And it's just sort of out of their control. But it's also going to be and I think one of the big areas that both sides are talking about are the suburbs of Cincinnati, Cleveland, Columbus. And in 2016, there was a big push to get these suburban women. And of course, it didn't work out for Hillary Clinton the way that her campaign thought it would.
Right.
So this year, we'll see if it's going to be any different for the Democrats.
All right, another question that was tonight. The candidates were asked about ECOT. Let's take a listen to their responses.
The mess and the scandal in state government that is ECOT. $186 million stolen from the state of Ohio on your watch.
Richard is wrong about ECOT. I'm the only person, again, on this stage who has taken action against ECOT. And it was not when the election started, Richard. It was well before that. I took action. I sued ECOT. Richard did not. I have been all over ECOT. We have won at every stage of the case all the way through. No.
And we're actually going to come back to that in just a couple of minutes, because right now we're going to go live to the spin room in Cleveland. Okay, and it looks like we will not be going there right now. We'll be going there in a couple of minutes, so that does give us a moment to get your reaction on that.
On ECOT?
Yes.
Well, obviously it's an issue that the Democrats have really tried to push. You know, the state's largest charter school going belly up, and if you don't know what the ECOT scandal is, it was the state's largest charter school. They overinflated their attendance figures to get millions of dollars of state funding wrongly. And so the Democrats have said, well, Mike DeWine and other Republicans were asleep at the wheel here and didn't properly give oversight to it.
Right.
And Mike DeWine says, well, he did, and Mike DeWine did sue an ECOT, but the issue here, if you're reading between the lines, is did he do it quickly enough? And that's up to voters to decide whether he did it quickly enough. So he did go against ECOT, that's true, but then CORDRAY also, he's not completely out of left field. I mean, he feels that it didn't happen early enough.
Okay, I have to ask, in your opinion, how will the candidates differ in office than, of course, our current governor, John Kasich?
I think if you have Mike DeWine, it's going to be, he'll be different on certain issues, and definitely he has a different personality than John Kasich. But I think on a lot of issues, it'll kind of be the same, certainly on things like taxes, social issues, just kind of a conservative but not Trump conservative approach to issues. And if you have Rich CORDRAY, you're going to have someone who is not exactly a complete leftist, although I'm sure a lot of Republican and politicos will send me emails about that. But you'll have someone who's a little bit more moderate than, say, Nancy Pelosi, and you'll have someone who is favoring, but then also favoring Democratic. There's like the main issues that Democrats care about. They'll restore local government funding. They're not as big as Kasich was about lowering the income tax level. And things like, environmental, and then a bunch of other issues too that CORDRAY talked about tonight.
Of course. Okay, so overall, now that all three debates are in the books, do you think there was really a clear winner?
I think I don't think it was about winning and losing. I think the point of these debates were to have the candidates introduce themselves and say what they would do as governor. And I think they both succeeded at that.
Both were able to accomplish it.
While at the same time throwing an awful lot of bombs at each other. So it kind of revealed their character. It revealed how they would do under pressure. We got at least an inkling of what they would do in office. So in that, I think that was successful. As to who won and lost, I never thought that was the real goal, even though a lot of analysts would have you think so.
All right, thank you so much. Right now, we're going to go live to the spin room at Cleveland State University, where Mike DeWine is expected to give some of his final thoughts on tonight's debate.
A little assessment of some of the things that I saw tonight. Richard Cordray is becoming increasingly isolated in his defense of this dangerous ballot initiative, Issue 1. A couple of things that I would like to point out. He got it flat out wrong when he said that if you have 19 grams of fentanyl, that you would go to prison. As a matter of fact, that's not our opinion that what he's saying isn't true. It is the opinion of the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Ohio, who made this clear in writing that Cordray's plan would lead to no prison time for people who had enough fentanyl to kill up to 10,000 people. That is very, very hard to believe that he continues to support this plan and that he won't backtrack on this dangerous proposal. It seems like, at this point, the only people that support Issue 1 are drug dealers, drug addicts, California billionaires, and Richard Cordray. And what Mike DeWine and I are going to do is fight with every ounce of our fiber to make sure that it doesn't pass. And he also, in one point, as he was waffling a little bit on this, talking about how he would be for other plans too, okay, if this passes, it's a constitutional amendment. There can be no other plans because this would enshrine this in the Ohio Constitution. It's how much he doesn't understand the issue, how much he's increasingly isolated, and why he should not be our next governor. I will also say that as I was sitting there watching this debate, I was watching the cash register ring up an unprecedented amount of spending proposals that Richard Cordray was for tonight. It seemed like there was no government spending that he wasn't in favor of. And he knows darn well that he either doesn't intend to keep these promises or there's no way to keep these promises without the largest tax increase in Ohio history. This is a risk that we cannot take. Ohio's economy is now moving in the right direction. We had on Friday an announcement that America's unemployment rate is the lowest it's been in nearly 50 years. We've gone away from the dark days of Richard Cordray and Ted Strickland, when taxes were raised, spending was increased, the budget wasn't balanced, 400,000 Ohioans lost their jobs, and people lost their hope. They thought Ohio was on the ropes. But we elected new leadership, people like Mike DeWine and John Husted. We reformed the tax code. We restored prosperity in this state. We got government spending under control, and now there's hope and opportunity again. The unemployment rate when Richard Cordray was part of the team leading this state was 10.4%. Now it's about 4.6%. Ohio's moving in the right direction. We can't possibly afford the spending that Richard Cordray is proposing, and it would be dangerous if we followed his way on the opioid plan. And that's why, just two reasons, assessments from tonight's debate about why Mike DeWine should be Ohio's next governor.
Let me just add a couple things. One of the points I wanted to make tonight is that the governor has to be governor for everyone in the state. You have to pull people together. You have to pull Democrats, Republicans, independents. I have a long history of doing that. I did that when I was in the U.S. Senate. I certainly have done it as Attorney General for the last 8 years, whether it is in trying to carve out the cancer that we found in our neighborhoods, not only in our cities, but in our rural areas, in regard to homes that have been abandoned. We had a major initiative that came about, frankly, because of Jim Rackauckus, who suggested that to me, and we talked about it, and we worked together with the land bank, and we got it done, had a huge impact in Cleveland. It's not done yet. We have still, obviously, a ways to go in that, but it made a difference. It made a difference not only in Cleveland, it made a difference in every small county, every mid-sized county in the state of Ohio. Again, that's pulling people together. If you look at what we did in regard to the rape kits, Cuyahoga County had the most, but Cuyahoga County also came together. Tim McGinty as the prosecuting attorney. We were able to put that together. along with the sheriff and along with the police department. Again, a bipartisan way to handle it. Never thought about who's a Democrat, who's a Republican. We had victims to seek justice for, and we were able to do that. So again, the other example I gave was in Toledo. Sheriff Tharp, Democrat, someone who I have worked with very, very closely as we try to think of innovative ways to get people into treatment. He came up with an innovative idea. We helped fund it, but he also funded it other ways as well. But we worked together, and we continue to work together on that. So that type of working together, something that I've done as the Attorney General, working with 88 county sheriffs, 88 county prosecuting attorneys. This is the type of work and pulling people together and making things happen. When I see a problem, I go after the problem, but I can't solve it alone. We have to work together and pull people in, and that's what I have done as the Attorney General, and frankly, that's exactly what I'm going to do as Governor of the state of Ohio. Anyway.
Molly Martinez, Spectrum News. Throughout these debates, you have said your opponent raised the possibility that could be bad for Ohio business. It could deter people from coming here and starting a business here if their rights are limited. What would you say to that?
Well, I would say that my position is that I believe that human life begins at conception. I believe that the job of government is to protect the most vulnerable among us. That certainly includes the unborn. It also includes young children who are in the womb when the mom needs help and assistance. So I take a very holistic approach to this. I think government exists to help. It exists for a number of reasons, but certainly it exists to help the most vulnerable members of society, and that's what I believe we should do, and that's what I intend to do as governor.
Where do you go from here? You have 1 month left.
Well, we're going to go out and do what I love to do, and that is talk and listen to the people of the state of Ohio. I've been doing that. I don't think anyone's traveled the state more than I have in the last few years, but I love to do that, and so you're going to see me out, pretty much full time, talking to people, but listening to people. I've traveled the state more than probably anybody, maybe except truck drivers, in the last few years. But I will tell you, I learn something every single day. And when I said during the debate that part of what I think my job as governor is to travel, to listen, to learn, and then to be a good partner with local government, be a good partner to help create businesses and jobs, to create jobs in the state of Ohio. So I'm looking forward to that. I told Fran the other night, I said, get the last debate behind us, and we'll go out and full-time talk to people and listen to people. I love it.
So this is the last debate, nothing in Toledo, not the City Club or other invitations?
Look, we had long negotiations with the CORDRAY team in regard to debates. These debates, I think, have been a lot of fun. I think we've been able to take the debates to different parts of the state, which is good. And I've enjoyed it a lot. And I hope the people who have watched it have enjoyed that and found it of interest as well. But it's time to go out and listen directly to people and to talk with the people of the state.
You mentioned earlier that you wanted to run higher education like a business. What is the bottom line?
Yeah, and I kind of pulled back a little bit if you watch what I said, because it has to run it like a business, but it's not a business. The idea, though, is that every state university is going through a process, and every liberal arts school, private schools are going through a process where they're continuing to try to reinvent themselves, figure out how they can serve the students, and you're seeing them do many different things. I'm just saying that work is a continuous process, and it's very important. Look, higher education is vitally important to this state. We are blessed in Ohio. We are blessed with great state universities, but we're also blessed great community colleges, and we are also blessed with many great private colleges. And so working to figure out how we can take that great asset and turn it into more jobs, more opportunity, more hope for people in Ohio is something that we're very focused on. John?
We adding to that, to the point about working like a business. if you get out and you talk to businesses around the state, what they want to make sure is that the skills that Ohio college graduates have are actually relevant for the jobs they're creating in the 21st century. So one of the things that we need the schools to do is to stay focused on helping students get the skills that will actually lead to a job and a career where they can afford to live their version of the American dream. And that's really what we've been talking about in this campaign, is how we modernize our education system, make it relevant to what's actually happening in the economy, so that people leave school prepared to take on the world's problems. And help Daryl Rowland not knock over the...
Time flies
but that's
at a pre-existing condition.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. But that, and again, that's why.
And we support covering that, Daryl.
Yeah, that's why in our plan, one of the things that we talk about is let's start looking at our universities and encourage them to help more, get the students into jobs, focus more on that. And the way that you get schools to do that is you start measuring it. And so in a DeWine Houston administration, we're going to start measuring that. We think it's very valuable. We think it's something that the schools can do. And it's going to tell the schools whether or not the people who have gone through, paid a lot of money, gone through the school, have a year later, 6 months later, or whatever period of time you want to pick, do they have a job? And that's significant. That's relevant.
And let me give you a Cleveland State example on this. They now have degree certification programs in blockchain, okay? That's something that 3 years ago people would have said, what is that? Actually, some people today will say, what is that? But the business community here, working with Cleveland State, is developing a program to give students in this community, this region, a strategic advantage that will be attracting jobs, capital, resources, new businesses to this area that have the potential to create the jobs of the future. That's how business and education need to work together to build this more prosperous future we're talking about for Ohio.
We have stayed 12 of our allotted 10 minutes. So.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Nice seeing everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Some final thoughts there from Republican gubernatorial candidate Mike DeWine and Lieutenant Governor candidate John Husted. It seems as though the tone was much calmer there. I'm curious for your thoughts.
Yeah, they're wrapping it up, and they have 30 days now. Each side has raised millions of dollars, so what they're going to be doing now is blanketing the airwaves. So if you like how these guys look, be ready, because you're going to see a lot more of them in the coming days.
All right, Jeremy, thank you. More of Decision 2018 coverage continues in just a few minutes. Stay with us.
Shoots it!
What you live for lives here. We are Spectrum Sports, exclusively on Spectrum. Saturdays, after the big game, Spectrum Sports is Ohio's destination for all things college football. Join the pros from 11 Warriors as they break down all the day's action. Listen in live on Coach Urban Meyer's news conference. What you live for lives here. 11 Warriors, postgame, Saturdays after the game on Spectrum Sports. Sunday mornings, take an in-depth look at your community. In Focus with Mike Kallmeyer, a half-hour show dedicated to the important issues.
We're going to instantly see the results.
Driven to bring decision makers together.
I can both probably relate to that.
And committed to elevating discussion and debate. Your community, your state, your show.
If people are talking about it, so are we.
In Focus with Mike Kallmeyer, Sunday mornings at 10:30 on Spectrum Sports. This week, Spectrum Sports is teaming up with your favorite site where Ohio State fans gather. 11 Warriors Report. Join the pros from 11 Warriors as they preview the week ahead and deliver everything Scarlet and Gray fans need to know. What you live for lives here. 11 Warriors Report. This week, only on Spectrum Sports. Exclusively on Spectrum.
And we're live back with Jeremy Pelzer with cleveland.com. Okay, so I'm curious to know, now that all three debates are done, do you think there are any critical topics that have been missed?
I didn't hear him talk a whole lot about taxes. I mean, they talked about where all the money to fund all their policy proposals is going to come from. But, you know, one of John Kasich's big goals as governor was to lower the state income tax with the end goal of eliminating it. And I haven't heard if they talked about it, it was in a blink of an eye because they didn't talk a lot about it. So it's going to be, you were talking before about maybe another change in what these two candidates will be focused on compared to the last 8 years. That's another thing right there. So taxes is one thing. They were asked a lot of questions tonight and they didn't necessarily answer them, like we were talking about earlier with the police community relations. With the net neutrality, Mike DeWine didn't really, he shifted to talk about fentanyl more than net neutrality. So yeah, there's a bunch of issues, but then again, you know, they covered so many topics tonight that if they were going to cover, you know, the entire thing, it was just going to be maybe 10 seconds per. You get a sense about how busy of a job being governor is because you have to deal with all these different things.
Such a broad spectrum. Yeah, absolutely. All right, so what's different in this election that we haven't seen in previous elections?
Well, the Democrats are competitive. That's one thing different than 2014. You have a neck-and-neck race. And really, I think I said this before, but you have two very veteran politicians, leaders of Ohio. Both, I don't think many people would question that they are qualified to be governor. Even if you disagree with them on the issues, you know, they're qualified. And, you know, I think that's good for the people of Ohio. Not that there was unqualified people before, but you have a lot of people now running who are just more about the issues, and I think that's good for democracy and good for Ohio.
You mentioned that sometimes they have avoided answering the question at hand, and so one of the things that I think has been really interesting is sometimes instead of answering with their platform, their goals, that they've answered with why not to vote for the opposing candidate.
Sure. Yeah. Well, Politics 101 is answer the question you wish you had been asked. And so it's, what would you do as governor? Well, I'll tell you, I wouldn't do what the other guy's doing, you know. And so I think, you know, that's just Politics 101. And well, we've seen that since politics was invented, and we'll see it for a long time to come.
Do you think that there was anything different in the preparation for this debate compared to the first two?
I think it was more of a distillation. You know, they've talked about they've done two debates, and you know they've done editorial boards, and it's to the point that they could do this in their sleep. And I think the goal going in being the last debate is kind of crystallizing their message. And I think if you were going to watch, not to play it up too much, but you were going to watch one debate of the 2018 gubernatorial campaign in Ohio, make it this one, because they really crystallized, and now they kind of have it down to a science.
All right, any other final thoughts that you want to share with us?
Less than 30. Tomorrow is the last day to register to vote. So if you haven't voted, registered, I would encourage everyone to do so. And then the day after that, 2 days from now, is going to be the first day of early voting. Yes. So vote early. Maybe not vote often, but vote early for sure.
And of course, Election Day on November 6th. If you have any questions about your voting locations or any voting needs, really, you can go to myohiovote.com. All right, very shortly, we are expecting to hear from CORDRAY. He is expected to be in the spin room in just a few minutes. Of course, we just heard from DeWine. Any other thoughts on his kind of tone change, his reaction? I thought it was really interesting that he had Houston talk for a little bit.
For DeWine? Yeah, Houston's been a big part of his campaign ever since he brought on Houston in November. You know, I don't know if that's because he yields to Houston on a bunch of issues, whether he made sure when he brought on Houston, you know, who was running for governor when he became DeWine's running mate. And so, you know, they have made a point of making Houston a very high-profile member of the campaign, more than a lot of running mates have been.
All right, Jeremy, thank you so much. We're going to go back now to the spin room in Cleveland, where CORDRAY is walking up.
We done with still pictures at this point?
Your thoughts on tonight, how it went?
I thought it was great. I thought it was a reason why we should continue this conversation further. I think these are things that voters benefit enormously from. Seeing us lay out our plans or fail to lay out our plans, and I think that people can make judgments from that are very different from hiding behind television ads.
You mentioned tonight that 27 counties have no public transit. How much of a priority is that for you, and how are you going to implement getting public transit to those places?
So it's enough of a priority for me to say that Ohio needs to now make an investment in public transit when Ohio has never done it before in more than 200 years of its history. And it's enough of a priority for me to put that in the infrastructure bond package that we're going to put in front of the voters of this state, along with access to broadband, which has been promised but never delivered in big parts of the state. And these are things I think we need to do to modernize Ohio and lead into the future and get things done that really affect and improve people's lives.
Where do you think you were strong and where do you think you were weak out there?
I thought I was strong for 60 minutes. I really did. I thought that this tonight was about leadership. It was about laying out very specific things that we can do for the people of the state of Ohio. And I thought in his case he was often unable to do that. It was all about, we'll think about this, we'll think about that, we'll bring some people together. You know, that doesn't give voters anything concrete to go on. And I think voters deserve more than that. And I think that that was a pretty one-sided comparison tonight in terms of who's ready to lead this state forward as governor, which is exactly what the job is.
Chuck Ringwald with Spectrum News. Why do you want another debate?
Well, we asked for 6, so we agreed ultimately to at least 3, and I think we should have more. I think these have been valuable. We still have a whole month till the election. We've got lots of time on the calendar, and I think it would be good for people to have more of a conversation with us, and I hope that Mike DeWine will agree.
What do you think?
Beg your pardon?
Why did you single out Toledo?
I know that Toledo has been asking for debate, angling for debate. I don't know if there's a formal invitation, but I know that the Blade and others up there have asked specifically. That's what I was aware of, and that's why I mentioned Toledo in particular. There may be other parts of the state, but that was the one that I was most aware of.
What do you think about being ready to leave? You've not, as Mr. DeWine mentioned, you've not put price tags on many of your proposals, and we didn't even talk about what may be the most expensive one tonight, a free 2-year community college.
Actually, that's not one of the more expensive ones, and that one we do have a price tag, and people like Bill Shakurti have looked at that one and found that when you optimize loans and grants, which many families are not in a position to do right now, and they end up paying more than they should, so-called free community college, I actually don't like the name, but investing in community college so that it could be taken on without debt only costs about $60 million a year, Darrell. It's actually a very affordable thing for Ohio. It's something we should do. Tennessee and New Jersey are doing it. We should do it in Ohio.
I just want to be clear. You say taken on without debt. Does that mean?
That means last dollar in by the state after you optimize federal loans and grants, and that's what Tennessee and New Jersey are doing. It's a very doable thing. It's being pushed around the country.
So
it's a sensible thing. So
some amount.
They would not have to out-of-pocket expense on this. They would have loans and grants from the federal government. Yes, that's correct. That's correct.
What do you think?
From WTOL 11 News. I want to ask about.
There you go. You should host the next debate.
Let's do it. Yeah.
All right, I'm fine. I'm agreed. Just get them to sign up.
We'll be on board with that.
Okay.
I have a question on issue 1. Your opponent says he sees that as the defining issue in this debate, as your opposition's on that issue. Tonight you inferred that his argument about the 19 grams killing 10,000 people is misleading or just simply not true?
No, the Columbus Dispatch has noted it's an outright lie. There's nothing in that issue that changes drug trafficking laws in Ohio, and people can be prosecuted if somebody has enough fentanyl to kill 10,000 people. By the way, he took it further on WLW radio in Cincinnati. He actually said in the discussion that if you have 1,000 pounds, a half a ton of fentanyl, you would only be charged with a misdemeanor. It's a grotesque lie and distortion. Clearly that would be prosecuted as trafficking. People don't carry around any amounts of fentanyl. It's too deadly, too dangerous, unless they're trafficking
Doesn't
it.
the constitutional amendment say less than 20 and it would be a misdemeanor?
Only if you charge it only as possession, but you would charge that as trafficking. This is where he's sort of misled everybody on this, and he's wrong on that. But by the way, at times it feels like the only issue he knows how to talk about is issue one. There's lots of issues in this campaign, and as I said, there's lots of approaches to the opioid crisis. The one approach that I'm not willing to accept is doubling down on the failed status quo of Mike DeWine. That's the one approach that I'm not willing to accept. What the Athens County prosecutor is putting forward as a package, what the Franklin County prosecutor and Columbus City attorney have jointly put forward as a bipartisan package, any of those things, including issue one, that would change the status quo, push more toward treatment, away from prison. This is still the most common offense in our prisons in Ohio, and it's ruining people's lives, and it's not a good approach. So,
one more question.
What do you think the defining issue is moving forward?
I think the defining issue is leadership. And I think the defining issue is who's going to be able to move this state forward, who's going to push this legislature forward, which has been such a backward force holding Ohio back. And I think there's no question that Mike DeWine will not be in a position to do that, but I believe I will.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay? Thank you.
Of course, Democratic candidate for Governor Richard Cordray there giving some of his final words tonight. Your thoughts?
I think Richard Cordray has shown, I think I tweeted this earlier, that he's a man who is, he's been called kind of a policy nerd, and he kind of comes off that way, but clearly he had his attack lines tonight. He had his one-liners, and he just peppered them right in there, whether they were, kind of
Fit
weird
the situation or not?
Yeah, and you saw that there, but I think he clearly has a clear policy proposal about where he wants to take Ohio. The Republicans will say, well, the devil's in the details, how are you going to pay for this stuff? Mm-hmm. But I think when it comes down to it, he has an idea of what he wants to do with Ohio, as does Mike DeWine.
All right, Jeremy. Jeremy Pelzer with cleveland.com. Thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you very much.
Something important to note, the Ohio Debate Commission, who hosted tonight's debate, this was their first debate to host. They will also be hosting an open forum for all gubernatorial candidates, including Republican Attorney General Mike DeWine, Democrat Richard Cordray, Libertarian Travis Irvine, and Green Party candidate Constance Gadwell Newton. The forum will be Monday, October 15th at the City Club of Cleveland. Doors open at the forum at noon, and the event begins at 12:30. The event will give candidates a final opportunity to present their plans before the general election in November. More information can be found at ohiodebatecommission.com. Don't forget, Election Day is November 6th. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us tonight. Have a great night.
Sunday